Seeing me holding my newborn in worn-out clothes, my grandmother frowned. Was not $250,000 a month enough, she asked. I replied calmly, I never received a single dollar. She froze, then immediately picked up her phone and called her lawyers. Moments later, her face went pale. Someone has been lying to me. My name is Anna. I am 33 years old, and just days after giving birth, I discovered my own mother had been stealing millions from me while leaving me to drown in medical debt. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by the people who should have protected you. The fluorescent lights of the underfunded Chicago Public Hospital buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow across the peeling linoleum floor. I sat on the edge of a narrow, rigid bed, clutching my 2-day-old son Leo to my chest. My body ached in ways I never knew were possible. Every muscle trembled from the exhaustion of a grueling 36-hour labor. The thin, scratchy hospital blanket offered no warmth against the draft coming from the poorly sealed window. I was entirely alone. There were no balloons. There were no flowers. There were no smiling relatives crowding the room to welcome my beautiful baby boy into the world. There was only the steady rhythmic hum of a heart monitor down the hall and the overwhelming, suffocating silence of my isolation. Leo shifted in my arms, wrapped in a faded generic hospital swaddle that had been washed so many times the fabric was practically transparent. I kissed the top of his fragile head, breathing in the sweet scent of him. He was perfect. He was innocent. He was entirely dependent on me. But as I looked down at his tiny, sleeping face, a wave of sheer terror washed over me. I had exactly $47 in my checking account. My phone vibrated on the plastic tray table next to my bed. The screen illuminated the dim room, displaying a notification from the billing department. The final balance for my delivery and postpartum care was $2,000. It felt like a death sentence. I reached for the phone, my fingers shaking, and opened my messages. I navigated to the thread with Derek. Derek was my ex-husband. He had walked out on me when I was 5 months pregnant, packing his bags on a rainy Tuesday morning, because according to him, I lacked ambition and dragged him down. He claimed he wanted a life of luxury and excitement, not a life tied down to a poor woman and a crying infant. I stared at his name on the screen, swallowing the last remnants of my pride. I typed a brief, desperate message. Derek, the hospital needs $2,000 before they will discharge us. I do not have it. Please, he is your son too. I hit send and watched the little read receipt appear almost instantly. I waited, holding my breath, praying that maybe seeing the reality of his newborn son might soften his heart. A minute passed, then 2. Finally, a reply popped up. My eyes scanned the words, and the air was completely knocked out of my lungs. You chose to have it. Do not call my lawyer. That was it. No asking if Leo was healthy. No asking if I survived the birth. Just cold, calculated cruelty. He was making it perfectly clear that I was completely on my own. Tears, hot and thick, blurred my vision. I wiped them away angrily, refusing to let Derek break me completely. But the reality of the hospital bill remained. I had no choice. I had to ask the one group of people I had been avoiding, my family. I opened our family group chat. The chat was usually filled with pictures of expensive dinners, luxury vacations, and passive-aggressive remarks aimed at me. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the inevitable humiliation. Mom, Brittany. I am so sorry to ask this, but I am at the hospital. I just had the baby. The bill is $2,000 and I cannot leave until it is paid. Derek refuses to help. Could you please loan me the money? I promise I will pay you back as soon as I can. I sent the message and closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the cold hospital wall. The silence in the room felt heavy, oppressive. I could picture them wherever they were, looking at their phones, rolling their eyes at my desperation. My mother Carol was probably sitting in her immaculate living room sipping imported wine. My younger sister Brittany was the family favorite. She had always been the golden child, the one who married well and lived the lifestyle my mother worshipped. I waited for the familiar chime of a notification. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it, my heart pounding with a fragile, desperate hope. It was a message from Brittany, but it was not an offer to help. It was a photo. I stared at the image on my screen. It was a selfie of Brittany and her husband, Jamal. Jamal was a wealthy wealth manager, a charismatic African American man who loved flaunting his success. In the photo, they were standing on a snow-covered balcony in Aspen, Colorado, wearing designer ski gear and holding crystal flutes of champagne. They looked perfectly bronzed, perfectly happy, and perfectly oblivious to my suffering. Below the photo, Brittany had typed her response. I read the words over and over, trying to process the sheer audacity of her cruelty. Oh my God, Anna, really, right now. Jamal just bought me a new Birkin bag to celebrate our anniversary, so we are totally tapped out on cash. Besides, you knew you were broke when you decided to keep the kid. You really need to learn how to budget better. Have fun in Chicago. I dropped the phone onto my lap. A Birkin bag. She was denying her own sister a loan for a medical emergency because her husband had just bought her a purse that cost tens of thousands of dollars. The disconnect from reality was staggering. Before I could even process the sting of Brittany's message, another text appeared in the group chat. This time it was from my mother, Carol. I braced myself, knowing exactly what was coming. Carol had never missed an opportunity to kick me when I was down. Her message was brief, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of emotional abuse. I told you not to keep that baby, Anna. You have always been such a massive disappointment to this family. Do not expect us to bail you out of a mess you created yourself. Figure it out. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor. I did not bother to pick it up. I pulled Leo closer to my chest, wrapping my arms around his tiny, fragile body. The room felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls were closing in on me. I was 33 years old, sitting in a bleak public hospital with a newborn baby, absolutely no money, and a family that treated my existence like a burden. The physical pain from the delivery was nothing compared to the sharp, suffocating agony of their betrayal. I buried my face in the thin fabric of Leo's swaddle and wept. I wept for the father who abandoned him. I wept for the aunt who valued a designer handbag over his safety. But mostly, I wept because I felt completely and utterly powerless. The hospital room grew darker as the afternoon sun dipped behind the gray concrete buildings outside my window. The shadows stretched across the floor, mirroring the creeping dread in my stomach. How was I going to feed him? How was I going to keep him warm in my drafty apartment? I listened to the steady rhythm of Leo breathing. It was a soft, delicate sound, a fragile reminder of the massive responsibility I now carried completely alone. He shifted in his sleep, his tiny fingers curling into a tight fist against my chest. In that moment, looking down at his perfect, innocent face, something inside me began to shift. The crushing weight of the despair slowly gave way to a cold, hard realization. They were never going to change. Derek was always going to be a selfish coward. Brittany was always going to be a vain, materialistic, self-absorbed golden child. Jamal would continue to enable her, fueling their lavish lifestyle while looking down on anyone who struggled. And my mother, Carol, would always use my pain as a tool to elevate herself, to prove that she was right and I was fundamentally flawed. For years, I had played the role they assigned to me: the struggling daughter, the quiet sister, the woman who just could not seem to get her life together. I had accepted their condescension because I believed deep down that I deserved it. I had swallowed their insults to keep the peace, to maintain some pathetic illusion of a family bond. But looking at Leo, I knew I could not play that role anymore. I could not let him grow up watching his mother beg for scraps of affection from people who viewed her as trash. I gently wiped my tears away with the back of my hand. The salt stung my tired eyes, but the physical sensation grounded me. I took a deep breath, the sterile hospital air filling my lungs. I did not have the money right now. I did not have a car to take us home. I did not have a partner to lean on or a mother to comfort me. But I had my son, and I had a fierce burning need to survive. I carefully reached down and retrieved my phone from the floor. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb of shattered glass that perfectly mirrored my shattered expectations. I opened the group chat one last time, staring at the photo of Brittany and Jamal in Aspen, smiling their million-dollar smiles. I looked at my mother's message, calling me a disappointment. I did not reply. I did not defend myself or beg or try to explain. I simply locked the screen and set the phone face down on the table. I looked back down at Leo. He was my motivation now. The fear that had paralyzed me just an hour ago was completely gone. It was replaced by a quiet, simmering anger. I did not know how I was going to pay the hospital bill yet. I did not know how I was going to get us back to my freezing apartment. But I knew one thing for certain. I was going to protect my son from these people at all costs. They had spent my entire life teaching me that love was conditional and that I was never enough. I would not let them teach him the same lesson. I gently rubbed his back, feeling the steady beat of his tiny heart against my palm. "We are going to be okay, Leo," I whispered into the quiet room. "I promise you, we are going to be more than okay." I set my phone down and closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion wash over me one last time before the real fight began. A sharp, confident knock on the heavy wooden door startled me out of my brief, exhausted rest. I fully expected a tired nurse coming to check my vitals, or perhaps a hospital social worker handing out cheap pamphlets on government assistance for struggling single mothers. Instead, the heavy door swung open to reveal a figure I never thought I would see standing in this bleak and underfunded ward. It was my grandmother, Beatrice. At 78 years old, Beatrice commanded any room she entered regardless of the setting. She had built a massive commercial real estate empire in Chicago completely from scratch, breaking through barriers with sheer ruthless intelligence. For the past 2 years, she had been isolated in her sprawling estate, recovering from a severe stroke. My mother Carol had aggressively appointed herself as the sole gatekeeper to Beatrice. Carol strictly controlled who could visit and what information reached my grandmother. Carol always told me Beatrice was too fragile for visitors, and that my mere presence would only agitate her delicate medical condition. Now looking at the imposing woman standing in my doorway, I realized that was just another calculated lie in a long history of deception. Beatrice stood leaning heavily on a custom silver-handled cane, but her posture remained impeccably straight. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire apartment lease. Flanking her were two massive private security guards who looked entirely out of place in the dingy public hospital corridor. "Anna." She breathed, her sharp blue eyes scanning the cramped, depressing room with evident disgust. "My God, Anna, what are you doing in a place like this?" I pulled Leo closer to my chest, suddenly hyper-aware of my miserable appearance. I wore a faded gray maternity shirt with a frayed collar, and the cheap hospital-issued blanket swaddling my son felt like rough sandpaper against my skin. "Grandmother," I said, my voice trembling slightly from the shock of seeing her. "How did you find me?" "I hired a private investigator," she stated matter-of-factly, stepping fully into the room and gesturing for her security guards to wait in the hallway. "I finally regained enough physical strength to bypass your mother's ridiculous security protocols. Carol tried to tell me you were unreachable on a spiritual wellness retreat in Bali, but something felt incredibly wrong. I needed to see you. I needed to see my great-grandson." She approached the bed, moving slowly but with absolute unyielding determination. She looked down at Leo, and her stern, intimidating expression softened into genuine maternal warmth. "He is beautiful," she whispered, reaching out a perfectly manicured hand to gently touch his soft cheek. "He has your eyes, Anna." Then her gaze shifted upward. She took in the stained ceiling tiles, the rattling air conditioning unit in the window, and finally my worn-out clothes. The warmth completely vanished from her face, replaced by a deep, chilling confusion. Seeing me holding my newborn in worn-out clothes, my grandmother frowned. "Wasn't $250,000 a month enough?" my grandmother asked. The stale air in the hospital room seemed to evaporate instantly. I stared at her, completely certain my exhausted brain had misheard the numbers. $250,000. I repeated the figure, sounding utterly absurd in the sterile silence of the ward. I replied calmly, "I never received a single dollar." She froze, then immediately picked up her phone and called her lawyers. Moments later, her face went pale. "Someone has been lying to me. Beatrice gripped the metal edge of my hospital bed, her knuckles turning white with sudden rage. "What do you mean you never received a single dollar?" she demanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous, razor-sharp whisper. "Anna, I set up a blind trust for you 3 years ago. The moment you turned 30, the disbursements were scheduled to begin. $3 million a year. $250,000 every single month. It was designed to ensure you would never have to rely on anyone ever again." My mind raced frantically, trying to process the sheer magnitude of what she was saying. $3 million a year. While I was clipping grocery coupons, while I was working double shifts on my feet, while I was begging my ex-husband for basic medical expenses, there had been an absolute fortune sitting in an account with my name on it. "I have been living paycheck to paycheck," I told her, keeping my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions tearing through my chest. "I rent a tiny walk-up apartment. I buy my clothes at thrift stores. Derek left me when I was 5 months pregnant because he said I was too poor and lacked ambition. The only reason I am sitting in this underfunded public hospital is because I could not afford anything else. I have never seen a trust fund, grandmother. I never even knew it existed until this exact second." Beatrice closed her eyes for a brief second. When she opened them, they were blazing with a terrifying, familiar fury. It was the kind of fury that had built skyscrapers and crushed rival developers in boardrooms across the country. "Carol," she spat the name out like toxic poison. "Your mother was the designated trustee. Because of my stroke, she convinced my legal team that you were traveling the world and needed her to manage the disbursements to protect you from financial predators. She showed me photographs, Anna. Photographs of you in Milan and Paris on private yachts holding designer bags. Those were photoshopped," I said, the realization hitting me with sickening clarity. "Or they were old pictures from my college study abroad trip that she manipulated. Grandmother, she has not spoken a kind word to me in years. Just an hour ago, she texted me in a family group chat calling me a massive disappointment for keeping this baby. She explicitly refused to loan me $2,000 to cover my hospital bill so I could go home." Beatrice let out a sharp, humorless laugh that held absolutely no joy. $2,000. She denied you a measly $2,000 while draining $3 million a year from your personal accounts. She did not hesitate for another second. Beatrice raised her phone to her ear and barked an order to her lead corporate attorney. "David, drop whatever you are doing right now. I need a full forensic audit on the Anna Trust account immediately. Yes, the one Carol manages. Pull every wire transfer, every bank statement, every withdrawal from the last 36 months. I want to know exactly where every single cent went." She listened for a moment, her jaw tight with barely contained wrath. "I do not care if it takes all night," she snapped into the receiver. "Carol has been intercepting the funds. She has been falsifying reports to me and forging legal signatures. Call the Wealth Management Division and freeze all accounts connected to Carol and Brittany immediately. Nobody moves a dime without my direct written authorization." Beatrice ended the call and looked at me, her expression fierce and highly protective. I sat on the bed, holding Leo, feeling like the solid ground had vanished beneath me. My own mother had stolen $9 million from me. She had watched me struggle, watched me cry over unpaid utility bills, watched my marriage fall apart under the heavy weight of financial stress, and she had done it all while sitting on a mountain of my stolen money. And Brittany knew. I realized, speaking the sickening thought aloud. My sister Brittany. Her husband Jamal is a wealth manager. He handles all of Mom's finances. Beatrice nodded slowly, her eyes turning dark with intense calculation. Jamal. Of course. Carol is too financially illiterate to pull off a sophisticated wire fraud scheme of this magnitude on her own. She would desperately need someone inside the financial system to launder the money to legitimize the massive transfers. Jamal is an African-American wealth broker who loves to brag about his self-made success at country club dinners. He has been moving your funds. That explains how he and your sister have been funding their sudden lavish lifestyle. The private jets, the Aspen vacations, the designer bags. They built their entire high society image using the money I left for you and your child. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with devastating precision. Brittany sending me a photo of her new Birkin bag while I sat in a public hospital, unable to afford basic care. Carol calling me a failure to deflect from her own monumental crimes. They were not just cruel family members. They were common thieves playing pretend with my inheritance. I am going to destroy them, Beatrice said, her voice carrying the absolute heavy weight of a blood promise. They thought because I was old and sick that they could steal from my bloodline. They thought they could leave my granddaughter and my great-grandson to suffer in abject poverty while they played rich. She reached out and gently stroked my hair, a rare gesture of physical affection from a woman who rarely showed vulnerability. You listen to me, Anna. You do not shed another tear over these people. They are not your family. They are parasites, and I am going to eradicate them from our lives. What do we do now? I asked, holding Leo closer to my chest. The fear I had felt earlier was entirely gone, replaced by an icy, focused determination. You stay right here and focus on that beautiful boy, Beatrice instructed. I am leaving my private security detail outside your door. Nobody gets in unless you explicitly authorize it. I am going straight to the federal building. David is meeting me there with the preliminary bank records. This is not just a messy family dispute anymore, Anna. What Carol and Jamal have done constitutes massive federal wire fraud and severe elder abuse. I am bringing the FBI into this immediately. The FBI. I repeated the reality of the situation, fully settling into my bones. Beatrice nodded, her expression completely resolute. When you steal millions across state lines using forged documents to intercept trust funds, you invite federal charges. Jamal thinks he is a clever broker, but he has just triggered a federal investigation that will tear his entire firm apart, and your mother will learn exactly what happens when you cross me. Beatrice turned toward the door, her cane tapping against the linoleum floor with renewed dangerous energy. The stroke may have slowed her physical body down, but her brilliant mind was as sharp and lethal as ever. She paused with her hand on the heavy metal door handle and looked back at me. Rest now, Anna. When you leave this hospital, you will never have to worry about a bill or a price tag for the rest of your life. I am going to make sure they return every single cent they stole from you, and then I am going to make sure they pay for the interest with their freedom. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone in the room once again. But the silence no longer felt oppressive or lonely. It felt highly charged with anticipation. I looked down at Leo, who was sleeping soundly, completely unaware that our lives had just irrevocably changed for the better. My mother and sister thought they had broken me. They thought they could keep me pushed down in the dirt while they stood on my tired shoulders to reach the top of the social ladder. They thought I would just quietly accept my role as the poor, pathetic family failure. They had no idea that they had just awakened a sleeping giant. The vast financial empire my grandmother built was now actively turning its full destructive force toward them. I leaned back against the hospital pillows, my heart beating with a steady, calm rhythm. The game had completely changed, and for the first time in my entire life I was holding all the winning cards. Exactly 1 hour passed. The quiet peace of the hospital room shattered. Loud voices echoed in the hallway outside my door. I recognized the shrill, demanding pitch immediately. Carol and Brittany had arrived. I heard the deep rumble of Beatrice's private security guards blocking their path. I gently placed Leo into the clear plastic hospital bassinet next to my bed. I smoothed the rough blanket over his small chest. Then I reached for my phone with the cracked screen. I slid it under the thin hospital sheet, resting my thumb over the voice memo application. I called out to the guards, telling them it was fine to let my mother and sister inside. I wanted them in here. I needed them to speak freely. The heavy wooden door slammed open, hitting the rubber stopper on the wall with a loud thud. Carol marched into the room looking like a cornered animal wearing a designer trench coat. Brittany trailed right behind her, still wearing her expensive ski resort attire. Her face was flushed bright red, and she was aggressively gripping her luxury handbag. Their expensive perfume instantly overpowered the smell of clinical antiseptic. Carol wore a beige cashmere coat that brushed against the dirty hospital floor, while Brittany adjusted a pair of oversized designer sunglasses. They looked at my modest surroundings with poorly disguised revulsion, as if my poverty was an infectious disease they might accidentally catch. There was no greeting. There was no inquiry about my health or my newborn son sleeping just a few feet away. They stormed to the foot of my bed, radiating a toxic, frantic energy that made the sterile room feel suffocating. Carol started screaming the moment the door clicked shut. "You are destroying this family over money!" she shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my face. "What did you say to your grandmother, Anna?" Jamal just called me in a complete panic. His firm is being audited, and all of our personal accounts are completely frozen. Brittany chimed in, her voice cracking with selfish outrage. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was, Anna? My credit cards were declined at the Aspen Resort front desk in front of everyone. I had to leave my luggage at the concierge. Our private flight was canceled. You ruined my anniversary trip. You ruined everything." I stared at them. Years ago, this exact scenario would have broken me. I would have cried. I would have scrambled to apologize and desperately sought their forgiveness. But the old Anna was gone. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I simply pressed the red record button on my phone, hidden safely beneath the blanket. The timer started ticking upward, capturing every single syllable of their unhinged tirade. I needed them to keep talking. I needed them to dig their own graves with their own arrogant words. I looked directly into my mother's frantic eyes. Grandmother told me about the blind trust, I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. She said, "You have been intercepting $3 million a year for the past 3 years." Carol paced the cramped room, waving her hands dismissively. "I needed those funds to maintain our social standing," she yelled, her voice dripping with extreme entitlement. "Do you think staying relevant in high society is cheap, Anna? We had obligations, charities to fund, gala tickets to purchase, country club fees to cover. We are the face of this family." She stopped pacing and glared at me with absolute contempt. "You just sell baby clothes online, Anna. You would not know what to do with real wealth. You would have wasted it on rent and cheap groceries. You do not understand how the world actually works. I protected that money by putting it into the family ecosystem where it belonged. Jamal has been investing it perfectly to secure our future." I kept my hands steady beneath the blanket. "So Jamal knows the money belongs to me?" I asked quietly, offering them enough rope to hang themselves. Brittany scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Of course he knows. He is a wealth manager, Anna. He is a professional. He had to reroute the trust disbursements through his firm to bypass the tax flags and keep Beatrice from getting suspicious. We used the money to build a massive commercial real estate portfolio. We are expanding the family wealth. You should be thanking us instead of crying to Beatrice like a pathetic victim. You are so utterly selfish, Anna." "How did you get past the bank authorization, Carol?" I asked, guiding the conversation toward the most legally damning evidence. "The trust required my personal signature to release the funds." Carol crossed her arms over her chest, looking incredibly annoyed. "I am your mother, Anna. I signed your name on the power of attorney documents when you were staying with me 3 years ago. You were a depressive mess back then anyway, crying over your bills and your failing marriage. The bank did not ask any questions because Jamal personally vouched for the paperwork. He pushed it through his compliance department. It was completely harmless. You did not even know the money existed, so you did not actually lose anything. The confession was absolute perfection. They had just freely admitted to federal wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy on a crystal-clear audio recording." I looked at Carol and Brittany, noting the stark contrast between their furious, entitled expressions and the bleak reality of the public hospital room they were standing in. They genuinely believed that their social status elevated them above the law. "You need to call Beatrice right now," Carol commanded, her tone shifting to aggressively authoritative. "Tell her you authorized Jamal to manage the funds on your behalf. Tell her you want the accounts unfrozen immediately. If you do not fix this, Jamal could lose his brokerage license. Do you want to be responsible for ruining his career?" Brittany stepped closer to the bed, her face twisting into a vicious sneer. "If you do not fix this, Anna, we will make sure you regret it. Derek has been asking around about you. Do not think we will not help him take Leo away from you. You are a broke, single mother sitting in a public ward. Jamal has the best lawyers in the city on retainer. We will tell the judge you are mentally unstable and financially destitute. You will never see this baby again." The threat was incredibly vile, but it did not carry the paralyzing fear they expected. I looked over at Leo sleeping peacefully in the plastic bassinet, oblivious to the venomous women hovering nearby. They were threatening to steal my child to protect their stolen luxury bags and ski trips. The depth of their moral bankruptcy was staggering. I shifted my gaze back to my mother and sister. My heart beat with a steady, calm rhythm. "I am not calling Beatrice," I stated, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. "I am not authorizing anything. And I am definitely not fixing the mess you created." Carol gasped, her hands flying to her face in dramatic shock. "How dare you speak to me like that? I am your mother. You owe me everything. You are tearing your own flesh and blood apart over money you did not even earn. You are a spiteful, ungrateful failure, Anna. You will die alone in this pathetic little life you have built." I did not react. I simply stared at her, absorbing every insult without letting it penetrate my armor. My silence seemed to infuriate them even more. They thrive on drama, on emotional reactions, on pushing people until they break. When I refused to break, they lost their power. "Let us go, Mom," Brittany said, grabbing Carol's arm and pulling her toward the door. "She is clearly having a psychotic episode. We will let Jamal handle this. He knows exactly how to deal with delusional people. You are going to lose everything, Anna. Remember that." Carol glared at me one last time, her eyes burning with absolute hatred. "You are dead to me," she spat. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind them, shaking the walls of the small room. The echo faded, leaving behind a profound sense of quiet. I waited 10 full seconds to ensure they were gone. Then I slowly pulled my phone from beneath the hospital blanket. I tapped the red square on the screen, stopping the recording. The file saved automatically. I stared at the digital audio file containing exactly 14 minutes and 20 seconds of pure, unadulterated confessions. It was a masterpiece of self-incrimination. I uploaded the audio file directly to a secure cloud server and forwarded a copy to Beatrice. I knew Jamal would soon deploy his high-priced attorneys to silence me, and Derek would come crawling out of the woodwork to claim whatever scraps he could find. They relied on fear and intimidation. I relied on absolute patience. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought I was just a weak, defenseless woman clutching a newborn with no resources to fight back. They were tragically mistaken. I gently lifted Leo from his bassinet, holding him close to my chest, feeling the warmth of his small body against mine. The ambush was over, but the real war was just beginning, and I had just secured the ultimate weapon. Section 4, 1,500 words. The heavy hospital door had barely settled into its frame when a new commotion erupted in the hallway outside. I could hear the deep, authoritative voices of Beatrice's private security guards issuing a stern warning. Then a man's voice, loud and dripping with unearned arrogance, cut through the clinical quiet of the ward. I knew that voice instantly. It was Jamal. My sister Brittany had married him 4 years ago, and ever since he had paraded around family events like a king among peasants. Jamal was a 32-year-old African-American wealth manager who loved the sound of his own voice and loved the flash of his expensive tailored suits even more. He operated with the kind of bloated confidence that only came from playing with other people's money. Right now, however, that confidence sounded forced and frantic. I gently tucked the blanket around Leo, making sure my infant son remained undisturbed by the noise. I called out to the security guards, telling them to stand down and allow the visitors inside. If my mother and sister had given me a golden confession, I was highly curious to see what kind of legal rope Jamal was bringing to hang himself with. Jamal strutted into my hospital room, pulling at the cuffs of his pristine navy blue suit. His jaw was clenched tight and a thin layer of sweat coated his forehead, betraying the severe panic hiding beneath his arrogant facade. He was not alone. Trailing closely behind him was a man who looked like he had stepped out of a late-night television commercial for personal injury claims. The man wore an ill-fitting gray suit, scuffed brown dress shoes, and carried a battered leather briefcase. He smelled strongly of cheap cologne and stale coffee. This was clearly the kind of lawyer you hired when you needed dirty work done quickly and quietly, without any ethical questions asked. "Well," Anna Jamal said loudly, crossing his arms over his chest as he glared down at me, "you have really outdone yourself this time, throwing a massive temper tantrum and dragging your grandmother into your little postpartum delusion. Do you have any idea the kind of regulatory nightmare you just triggered at my firm? I looked at him calmly, resting my hands gently on the edge of the plastic bassinet. I did not trigger anything, Jamal, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. You triggered it the moment you decided to intercept federal trust funds across state lines. The FBI is going to have a fantastic time looking through your highly sophisticated investments. Jamal let out a sharp, abrasive laugh that bounced off the peeling walls of the cramped room. He uncrossed his arms and pointed a finger at my face. You think you are so smart sitting here in this pathetic public hospital room playing the victim? You think Beatrice is going to save you? Beatrice is a sick old woman who barely knows what year it is. And you are a broke, unstable single mother who just got dumped by her husband. You have zero credibility, Anna. Nobody in the legal system is going to listen to a woman who buys her clothes at discount racks over a licensed certified wealth manager. He snapped his fingers at the sleazy lawyer standing behind him. The man scrambled forward, quickly opening his battered briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal paper and handed it to Jamal. Jamal grabbed the document and tossed it aggressively onto my hospital bed. It landed right next to my knee. Read it. Jamal commanded, a vicious, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. I looked down at the paper without touching it. The bold black letters at the top of the page read, Power of Attorney. That is an irrevocable legal authorization, Jamal boasted, leaning over the bed to invade my personal space. You signed that document exactly 3 years ago. Remember when you had your pathetic little depressive episode and locked yourself in your apartment for a month? You signed over total financial management and legal proxy rights to your mother and to me. You explicitly authorized us to handle any and all trust disbursements to protect you from your own financial incompetence. Every single dollar I moved was completely legal and totally authorized by your own hand. The cheap lawyer chimed in, his voice raspy and unpleasant. My client has acted in full accordance with the fiduciary duties outlined in that document, ma'am. If you pursue this ridiculous vendetta with your grandmother, we will immediately counter-sue you for gross defamation of character, malicious prosecution, and intentional interference with business relations. We will drain whatever pennies you have left. Jamal nodded eagerly, his chest puffing out with pride. He truly believed he had just delivered a fatal blow. And I will not stop at just suing you, Anna. I will destroy you. I will call Child Protective Services the second I walk out of this hospital. I will show them your bank statements. I will show them this filthy hospital room. I will tell them you are suffering from severe postpartum psychosis and that you are in active danger to that baby. You are a broke, unstable single mother. The state will take Leo away from you before you even get discharged. Do not test me, Anna. You will lose your son. A cold, heavy silence descended upon the room. Jamal stood there breathing heavily, completely convinced that his threat of taking my newborn child had broken my spirit. He expected me to shatter into a million pieces. He expected me to cry and beg for mercy. He expected me to call Beatrice and call off the federal investigation just to keep my baby safe. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy legal paper. The document felt crisp between my fingers. I kept my face entirely blank, a mask of pure, unbothered stone. I scanned the text, reading the dense legal jargon that attempted to grant Carol and Jamal absolute control over my entire life. Then I looked down at the bottom of the page where the signature line was located. There, scrawled in black ink, was my name, Anna. I stared at the signature for a long, silent moment. The loops were wrong. The pressure of the pen was entirely inconsistent with my handwriting. Whoever had forged this document had clearly traced it from an old birthday card or a casual receipt. They had not even bothered to match the proper date format I always used. It was an incredibly sloppy, lazy attempt at forgery. It was exactly the kind of careless mistake someone like Carol would make, believing she was untouchable. I looked back up at Jamal. The arrogant smirk on his face began to waver ever so slightly under my deadpan stare. Are you actually trying to intimidate me with this? I asked, my voice dropping to a freezing quiet tone that made the sleazy lawyer nervously shift his weight from one foot to the other. Jamal stiffened, his bravado cracking just a fraction. It is a legally binding document, Anna. You signed it. You authorized everything. You have absolutely no case. I let out a soft, humorless breath. I slowly lifted the piece of paper and extended my arm, handing it back to him. He snatched it from my fingers, gripping it tightly. You should invest in a better lawyer, Jamal, I stated, staring directly into his terrified eyes. And you should definitely invest in a better forger. I am left-handed, Jamal. I have been left-handed my entirely life. The slant of that signature is distinctly right-handed. Furthermore, 3 years ago I was legally married to Derek. In the state of Illinois, any sweeping power of attorney granting external financial control over marital assets requires the notarized signature of the legal spouse. Derek never signed this. I never signed this. Jamal's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very sick. This piece of paper is not a shield, Jamal. I continued, my voice slicing through his panic like a scalpel. This piece of paper is a signed physical confession to federal forgery. You just walked into a hospital room and handed me the exact evidence the FBI needs to elevate your wire fraud charges to a much higher sentencing bracket. The cheap lawyer took a sudden panicked step backward, bumping into the heavy wooden door. He looked at Jamal with wide, terrified eyes. You told me she signed it, he hissed, his voice trembling with fear. You told me the authorization was authentic. I am not losing my license over a forged federal document. The lawyer did not wait for an explanation. He turned, grabbed the door handle, and practically ran out of the hospital room, fleeing down the corridor as fast as his scuffed brown shoes could carry him. Jamal stood entirely alone by the side of my bed, holding the forged document as if it were a live grenade. His hands were shaking violently now. The expensive tailored suit suddenly looked far too big for him. He looked down at the paper, then back at me, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. He finally realized that the weak, pathetic sister-in-law he had mocked for years was currently holding the absolute power to ruin his entire existence. Get out of my room, I commanded, my voice radiating absolute authority. I am going to enjoy watching the authorities dismantle your pathetic, fraudulent life brick by brick. Jamal backed away slowly, unable to break eye contact. He stumbled against the doorframe, clutching the forged paper to his chest before turning and fleeing into the hallway. I listened to his frantic footsteps fading away into the distance. The threat against my child had been a massive miscalculation. They had tried to use my deepest vulnerability against me, but all they had done was ignite a fire that was going to burn their entire luxurious world to ashes. I settled back against the pillows, looking down at Leo. We had just won the first major battle. Now it was time to leave this bleak hospital and begin the real war. The harsh, biting wind of the Chicago winter whipped through my thin jacket as I stepped out of the rideshare vehicle. I held the heavy plastic infant carrier tightly against my chest, shielding Leo from the freezing gust. The discharge process at the hospital had been long and exhausting. Beatrice had offered to send a private luxury transport and move me directly into a suite at the Four Seasons, but I had politely declined. I needed to return to my own apartment. I needed to ground myself in my own space before executing the next phase of my absolute destruction of the people who had wronged me. I pushed through the heavy glass door of my apartment building, ignoring the flickering fluorescent light in the tiny lobby. The elevator was broken again, a standard occurrence in this dilapidated building. I took a deep breath and began the slow, agonizing climb up 3 flights of concrete stairs, holding my newborn son. Every step sent a fresh wave of physical pain through my recovering body, but I gritted my teeth and kept moving. I unlocked the door to my cramped one-bedroom apartment and stepped inside. The air was cold because I had turned the thermostat down to save money on the heating bill before I went into labor. The small living room was cluttered with cheap second-hand baby gear, a faded bouncy seat, a stack of generic diapers sitting on a scratched coffee table, and a simple wooden crib squeezed into the corner of the room. It was a bleak, depressing reflection of the poverty I had been forced to endure. But as I looked around the tiny space, knowing what I knew now, the apartment did not feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a temporary waiting room. I gently lifted Leo from his carrier and placed him into the wooden crib. He let out a soft, sleepy sigh and settled into the mattress. I stood over him for a long moment, watching his chest rise and fall. The sheer magnitude of my hidden wealth was staggering. $45 million sat quietly in an offshore corporate account under my exclusive control. I had built a massive organic baby brand completely anonymously, working late into the night from this exact tiny apartment. I had endured the poverty, the struggle, and the agonizing stress specifically to protect my company from my greedy mother and my incredibly selfish husband. Now the hiding was over. A sharp, aggressive knock on my front door pulled me from my thoughts. I frowned, looking at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was too early for the mail carrier, and I was certainly not expecting any visitors. I walked quietly to the door and peered through the scratched brass peephole. My stomach gave a violent, sickening lurch. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, shifting his weight impatiently from foot to foot, was Derek. My ex-husband wore a crisp, expensive winter coat that I had bought for him 2 years ago. His hair was perfectly styled, and he was holding a cheap, plastic-wrapped bouquet of grocery store carnations in his left hand. The utter audacity of this man showing up at my door just days after texting me that he would not pay a dime for his son's hospital bill was mind-boggling. He had abandoned me when I was 5 months pregnant, complaining that I was too poor and lacked the ambition to maintain his desired lifestyle. Now he was standing outside my door, trying to look like a concerned, devoted father. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, leaving the chain securely attached. I stared at him through the narrow gap, my expression entirely blank. "What do you want, Derek?" I asked, my voice echoing coldly in the quiet hallway. Derek flashed his trademark charming smile, the one he used to talk his way out of parking tickets and manipulate retail workers. "Anna," he said, his voice dripping with fake, syrupy sweetness. "You are home. I went by the hospital, but they said you were already discharged. I brought these for you." He held up the pathetic, crushed carnations. I did not move a muscle. "I asked you a question, Derek. What do you want? You made it explicitly clear in your text message that you wanted nothing to do with us. You told me not to contact your lawyer." Derek's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he quickly recovered. "I was just stressed, Anna. You know how demanding my job is. I panicked, but I have done a lot of soul-searching over the past 48 hours. I realized that running away was a massive mistake. I want to be here for you. I want to be a real father to Leo. We are a family, Anna. We should be doing this together." I stared at him, letting the heavy silence stretch out between us. It was incredibly pathetic watching a grown man try to pivot so desperately. I knew exactly why he was suddenly playing the devoted family man. The timing was entirely too convenient. "Brittany called you, did not she?" I stated flatly. Derek blinked his eyes, darting away nervously. "What do you mean?" "I do not talk to your sister Anna." "Do not insult my intelligence, Derek." I snapped, my patience completely evaporating. "Brittany or Jamal called you. They are running scared because my grandmother just exposed their massive wire fraud scheme. They told you about the blind trust. They told you that Beatrice left me a multi-million-dollar fortune, and suddenly your soul-searching magically guided you straight back to my front door. You do not care about Leo. You are just a vulture circling what you think is a fresh carcass." Derek's charming facade instantly melted away, leaving behind the greedy, aggressive narcissist I had unfortunately married. He let out a harsh, arrogant laugh and pushed his hand flat against the door, straining against the metal chain. "Fine, Anna." He sneered, his true colors proudly on display. "You want to play hardball? Let's play. Your sister told me everything. She told me Beatrice set up a trust fund for you worth millions of dollars. She told me those disbursements started 3 years ago." He leaned closer to the gap in the door, his eyes shining with unadulterated greed. "We were legally married 3 years ago, Anna. That means that trust fund was established and activated during our marital union. In the eyes of the law, any asset acquired during the marriage is considered joint marital property. I do not care how much you hate me right now. I am legally entitled to 50% of every single dollar in that trust. I am going to take half of your massive fortune, and you cannot do a damn thing to stop me." I looked at his greedy, sweating face and felt a profound, overwhelming wave of absolute satisfaction. He thought he had just delivered a masterstroke. He thought he had trapped me into sharing my wealth. He was so blinded by the dollar signs in his eyes that he had completely forgotten his own manipulative history. I reached up and unhooked the metal chain. I pulled the door fully open, standing tall and completely unafraid in the doorway. Derek grinned, thinking my action was a sign of surrender. He took a step forward, expecting to walk right into my apartment. I held up my hand, stopping him dead in his tracks. "You are incredibly stupid, Derek," I said, my voice quiet but laced with lethal precision. "You are so blinded by greed that you cannot even remember your own aggressive legal demands." Derek frowned, his arrogant grin slipping away. "What are you talking about?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "2 years ago, before we got married, you were absolutely terrified that my lack of ambition and my poor financial status would drag you down into debt. You thought your mid-level corporate job made you superior to me. Do you remember what you forced me to sign 2 weeks before our wedding, just to protect your pathetic little retirement account and your leased luxury car?" The color vanished from Derek's face. His mouth dropped open slightly as the memory hit him like a physical blow. "You forced me to sign an ironclad, severely restrictive prenuptial agreement," I reminded him, emphasizing every single word. "You hired a ruthless attorney to draft a document that explicitly states that any and all assets, trusts, businesses, and income acquired during the marriage remain the sole and exclusive property of the individual who acquired them. You specifically demanded a complete separation of assets because you were terrified I would try to take your money." Derek took a stumbling step backward, the crushed grocery store carnations slipping from his hand and hitting the dirty hallway floor. "That prenup was just a formality," he stammered, his voice shaking wildly. "That was just standard legal protection. It does not apply to a multi-million-dollar trust fund. It applies to absolutely everything, Derek," I stated, coldly, shutting down his desperate delusion. "You signed a legally binding document that completely severs you from my finances. You have zero claim to the trust fund. You have zero claim to the $45 million business I built right under your arrogant nose. You get absolutely nothing. You walked out on your pregnant wife because you thought she was poor. Now you get to live the rest of your miserable life knowing you legally locked yourself out of a massive empire." Derek's eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated horror. He opened his mouth to argue, to beg, to demand another chance, but I did not give him the opportunity to speak another word. "You dug your own grave, Derek," I said, staring him right in the eyes. "Now go lie in it." I slammed the heavy apartment door right in his face. I engaged the deadbolt and slid the metal chains securely back into place. I stood in the quiet hallway of my cramped apartment, listening to his frantic, heavy breathing on the other side of the wood. A moment later, I heard him kick the wall in frustration before his heavy footsteps stomped away down the hall. I walked back into the living room and looked at Leo peacefully sleeping in his crib. I had just effortlessly neutralized the second threat. Derek was legally and financially paralyzed by his own historical greed. Now there was only one thing left to do. It was time to deal with my mother, Carol, and my sister, Brittany. They were about to discover exactly what happens when you try to financially starve a woman who secretly owns the entire bank. The next morning, the harsh reality of my situation should have crushed me completely. Leo needed a specific brand of specialized formula and a new package of diapers. I reached for my cracked phone to place a quick grocery delivery order from the local pharmacy down the street. I added the essential items to my digital cart, hit the checkout button, and waited for the standard confirmation screen. Instead, a glaring red error message flashed aggressively across my screen. "Transaction declined. Please contact your financial institution." I frowned. I knew perfectly well that I only had $47 to my name, but the total order was merely $32. I opened my personal banking application and typed in my password. The screen loaded, but instead of displaying my meager checking balance, a gray lock icon appeared with a bold notification. "Account suspended. Please contact your branch manager." I quickly pulled out my singular emergency credit card and typed in the numbers. Suspended. Jamal. He had actually done it. Using his high-level broker connections and his completely unethical sway over the banking infrastructure he managed, he had illegally frozen my personal checking accounts. It was a classic aggressive intimidation tactic utilized by financial abusers. He wanted to cut off my only lifeline. He wanted me to stand in a freezing apartment holding my newborn son, completely unable to buy a single can of formula. He wanted me to feel the raw, paralyzing terror of absolute poverty so deeply that I would pick up the phone, call Beatrice, and beg her to drop the federal wire fraud investigation. He genuinely believed that starving a mother would force her into immediate, desperate submission. Before I could even process the sheer illegality of Jamal's fiduciary breach, my phone began vibrating intensely in my hand. A rapid succession of text messages flooded my lock screen. They were from old high school acquaintances, distant cousins, and former coworkers I had not spoken to in years. Are you okay? Call me if you need to talk. What is happening with your family? I opened my social media applications. The reason for the sudden influx of concerned messages became disgustingly clear. Brittany had launched a massive coordinated smear campaign against me. Right at the top of my feed was a lengthy, highly orchestrated post from my sister. It was plastered across Facebook and Instagram, complete with a carefully curated photograph of Brittany looking appropriately distressed while clutching a tissue to her face. The caption was an absolute masterclass in manipulative gaslighting. Heartbroken. Please keep our family in your prayers today. My older sister Anna is currently suffering from a severe episode of postpartum psychosis. We have been trying to get her psychiatric help, but she has become completely delusional. She is currently attempting to scam our sick elderly grandmother out of her money to fund her erratic behavior. It is devastating to watch someone you love lose their grip on reality. We are doing everything we can to protect our grandmother and get Anna the institutional help she so desperately needs. Please respect our privacy during this family tragedy. Right below the post, my mother Carol had left the top comment, ensuring maximum visibility. My poor brave Brittany, you have been so strong dealing with your sister's toxic mental breakdowns. We will get through this dark chapter together as a family. The post already had thousands of likes and hundreds of comments pouring in. People were offering Brittany their deepest sympathies, praising her for her bravery, and offering unsolicited advice on how to handle a mentally unstable family member. They were painting me as a deranged, gold-digging lunatic to completely discredit any claims I made against them. It was a brilliant preemptive strike. If the FBI investigation leaked to the public, Carol and Brittany had already established a highly visible public narrative that I was simply a psychotic woman making up crazy delusions. In the past, reading those vicious, calculated lies would have sent me into a severe panic attack. I would have frantically drafted a dozen long defensive posts trying to explain my side of the story to strangers. I would have called every person commenting, begging them to believe me. I would have cried until my eyes were swollen shut. But as I stood in my freezing kitchen staring at the digital character assassination unfolding on my cracked phone screen, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, razor-sharp clarity. I did not panic over my declined debit card. I did not shed a single tear over my ruined public reputation. I simply walked over to the kitchen counter and filled the electric kettle with water. I turned it on, listening to the soft, comforting humming sound as the water began to boil. I prepared a warm bottle for Leo, testing the temperature against my inner wrist before walking back into the living room. I sat in the faded wooden rocking chair and fed my son, watching his small hands instinctively reach up to grip my index finger. He was safe. He was warm. And he was completely oblivious to the vicious war raging outside our apartment doors. Let them post their pathetic little lies, I thought to myself as Leo drank his formula. Let Jamal abuse his financial privileges to lock a bank account with $47 in it. Let them build their entire legal defense on the arrogant assumption that I was a helpless, broke victim who had absolutely no resources to fight back. They were operating on vastly outdated intelligence. They were playing a cheap game of checkers while I had been quietly mastering international chess for the past 5 years. When Leo finished his bottle and drifted back into a deep, peaceful sleep, I gently laid him in his crib. I pulled the soft knitted blanket up to his chin, ensuring he was perfectly comfortable. Then I walked over to the small, battered desk, sitting in the corner of my living room. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out my laptop. It was not the cheap, generic laptop I used for browsing the internet or checking my personal email. It was a highly secure, heavily encrypted device that I kept exclusively for my corporate business operations. I flipped the sleek metal screen open and waited for the complex operating system to boot up. The screen illuminated, casting a cool blue glow across my face in the dim room. I did not navigate to my social media accounts to read Brittany's pathetic lies. I did not open my personal banking application to look at the red, suspended notifications Jamal had so proudly orchestrated. Instead, I opened a secure incognito browser window and typed in a complex web address. The portal for an elite-tier corporate banking institution loaded on the screen. It was a private financial institution that handled exclusively high-net-worth commercial clients and international corporate accounts. I typed in my administrative username and a heavily encrypted 16-character password. My phone buzzed with a biometric two-factor authentication request. I scanned my fingerprint to approve the login, and the system rapidly verified my executive credentials. The loading icon spun for exactly 2 seconds before the main corporate dashboard materialized. At the top left corner of the screen, the registered account name sat in bold black letters: Nurture Core Holdings, LLC, a Delaware-registered limited liability company. And right in the center of the screen, the current liquid cash balance was proudly displayed, $45 million. I stared at the 9-digit number glowing brightly on the monitor. It was the ultimate culmination of 5 years of grueling, relentless, anonymous work. While Derek was out drinking with his corporate friends, complaining about his poor, unambitious wife, I was researching organic supply chains and manufacturing logistics. While Carol and Brittany were attending high society galas, spending my stolen trust fund money to buy designer clothes, I was aggressively negotiating massive distribution contracts with national retail chains. I had built Nurture Core from a tiny concept sketched out in this very apartment into a highly lucrative premium baby brand. I had meticulously structured the entire corporate entity through anonymous shell companies and blind trusts in Delaware, specifically to ensure that my mother and my ex-husband could never attach their greedy hands to my hard-earned success. I had hidden my massive empire in plain sight, protecting my wealth with an impenetrable fortress of legal corporate anonymity. They wanted to financially freeze me. Jamal thought cutting off my access to $47 would completely break my spirit and force me to surrender. He had absolutely no idea that I possessed the liquid capital to buy his entire boutique brokerage firm in pure cash right now without even making a dent in my corporate holdings. He thought he was cleverly locking me out of the financial system. He had actually just locked himself into a steel cage with a financial apex predator. I reached out and gently closed the laptop screen. I had the endless capital. I had the absolute proof of their federal crimes. Now it was finally time to deploy the money and execute my strategy. They had drawn first blood with their financial freezes and social smears. It was time for me to systematically dismantle their entire lives without any mercy whatsoever. I stood up, walked back to my sleeping son, and smiled. I was finally fully ready for this war. I packed my laptop into a tote bag. I dressed carefully, selecting a sharp charcoal blazer, pairing it with dark slacks. It was a far cry from the worn-out maternity clothes I wore in the hospital. I bundled Leo into an insulated stroller cover, ensuring the bitter winter wind would not touch his fragile skin. I hailed a premium car service, paying the fare with my active corporate account. Jamal might have locked my personal debit card, but my business assets were untouched by his dirty hands. The ride to the financial district took 20 minutes. The glass architecture of the corporate law firm reflected the bleak winter sky. This was the fortress where Beatrice conducted her most ruthless business transactions. I pushed Leo through the revolving doors and approached the security desk. A guard checked my identification and escorted me to a private elevator. The doors chimed open on the penthouse floor, revealing a sprawling reception area lined with imported Italian marble. A paralegal guided me directly to the primary executive conference room. I stepped directly into the massive room. Beatrice sat at the head of a polished mahogany table, looking formidable in a dark navy suit. Flanking her were 4 imposing individuals who radiated corporate lethality. These were federal litigators and elite forensic accountants, the absolute best professionals money could buy. Beatrice smiled warmly when she saw Leo motioning for me to sit beside her. I parked the stroller securely and took my seat. My grandmother looked at me, her expression shifting from maternal warmth back to serious business. She handed me a thick manila folder. "The initial audit is completely finished," she stated, her voice echoing slightly in the large, silent room. "We have tracked every unauthorized wire transfer Carol and Jamal made over the past 36 months. But before we discuss their impending federal indictments, we critically need to discuss your immediate financial security, Anna. We are fully prepared to advance you immediate living expenses to bypass the illegal banking freeze Jamal initiated." I placed my hand flat on the manila folder. "I appreciate that generous offer, grandmother, but I do not need a financial advance. I need to show you something important." I pulled my encrypted laptop from my tote bag and opened it on the mahogany table. I typed in my security credentials and authenticated the biometric scan. The corporate banking portal loaded instantly, displaying my dashboard. I turned the bright screen toward Beatrice and her specialized team of experts. The 9-digit balance glared brightly in the absolute center of the high-definition screen. $45 million under the registered legal name, Nurture Core Holdings, LLC. Beatrice stared intently at the screen, completely silent. For a seasoned woman who regularly negotiated 9-figure real estate developments, she rarely showed genuine surprise. But right now her jaw visibly tightened, and her sharp blue eyes darted rapidly from the glowing screen to my calm face. "What exactly is this, Anna?" she asked, her demanding tone requiring absolute clarity. "This is my private company," I explained, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "I am the sole anonymous founder and chief executive officer of Nurture Core. It is a successful organic baby products brand. I built it completely from scratch over the past 5 grueling years, working entirely anonymously from my tiny apartment. I personally manage all the complex supply chain logistics, international manufacturing contracts, and national retail distribution networks." One of the senior forensic accountants leaned forward, inspecting the screen closely. "Nurture Core," he repeated, sounding genuinely stunned by the revelation. "My financial firm thoroughly analyzed that specific brand's explosive market growth last quarter. It is dominating the entire premium infant care sector nationwide. You built a multi-million-dollar enterprise completely under the radar without anyone knowing." I nodded slowly, shutting the laptop screen with a soft, satisfying click. I had to remain anonymous. I told Beatrice, looking directly into her sharp eyes. "You know exactly how insanely toxic Carol is. You know how intensely greedy and manipulative Derek was during our entire marriage. If my mother knew I possessed this massive level of liquid wealth, she would have constantly demanded funds to bankroll her ridiculous high society obsession. If Derek knew, he would have quit his job and forcefully drained my business accounts to fund his luxury car addiction. I quietly watched them constantly tear me down, calling me a failure and a disappointment. I let them blindly believe their own false narrative because my perceived poverty was the absolute perfect camouflage. It was the only possible way I could quietly build my empire without them bleeding me dry." Beatrice sat back heavily in her large leather executive chair. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her weathered face, transforming her stern expression. It was a beautiful smile of pure, unadulterated pride. "You played them perfectly," she said, her voice thick with genuine admiration. "You let those fools completely underestimate you while you secured your own massive independent fortune. You have the exact same predatory, ruthless business instincts I do. We are going to make a truly terrifying team, Anna. Now let us talk about Jamal," I said, shifting the intense focus to the arrogant man who foolishly thought he could starve me into submission. "What exactly did your accounting team find buried in his financial accounts?" Beatrice gestured to the tall forensic accountant sitting across from her. He opened a thick black binder and slid several highlighted pages across the polished table toward me. "Jamal is an absolute fool," the accountant stated bluntly, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "He did not safely stash the stolen trust fund money in secure offshore accounts. He arrogantly wanted to play in the big commercial leagues. He desperately wanted to be a commercial real estate mogul, exactly like your grandmother, but he lacked the fundamental intelligence required to succeed." The accountant pointed to a series of complex financial flowcharts mapped out on the paper. "Jamal took the $9 million he illegally stole from your trust and recklessly used it as collateral to secure a massive commercial bank loan. He heavily leveraged the stolen cash to purchase a highly distressed retail shopping complex located on the declining outskirts of the city. He arrogantly thought he could rapidly renovate the dying property and quickly flip it for a massive profit to solidify his fake reputation in high society investment circles. He desperately wanted to prove to everyone he was a financial visionary. Instead, he blindly walked directly into a brutal financial slaughterhouse. The commercial real estate market completely tanked. The accountant continued his index finger, tracing a steep downward red line on the printed graph. The primary anchor tenants in his shopping complex went entirely bankrupt and permanently broke their commercial leases. Jamal currently has absolutely no rental income generating from the massive property. To desperately keep the failing project afloat and strictly avoid defaulting on his massive construction loans, Jamal started taking out aggressive, risky margin loans against his own personal brokerage accounts. He is currently drowning in highly toxic, high-interest debt. He is rapidly burning through stolen cash at an entirely unsustainable rate, just to barely pay the monthly interest on the worthless commercial property. Beatrice leaned forward, tapping her heavy, silver-handled cane against the plush-carpeted floor. That is exactly why your mother and sister stormed into your hospital room in a complete manic panic, she explained, her eyes flashing. When I fiercely ordered my elite legal team to instantly freeze all the financial accounts Carol and Jamal controlled, we accidentally cut off the exact daily liquidity Jamal was desperately using to service his toxic commercial debt. If Jamal misses his next required margin call, the commercial lenders will mercilessly seize all his personal assets. He is facing total, absolute financial annihilation. His entire fake luxury lifestyle, the private chartered jets, the Aspen ski vacations, the expensive designer bags, it is all entirely built on a rapidly crumbling foundation of extreme leverage and stolen money. I looked down at the complex financial documents, analyzing the raw data with the exact same ruthless precision I routinely used to aggressively negotiate my corporate manufacturing contracts. Jamal was not just a common pathetic wire fraud criminal. He was a desperate, heavily leveraged debtor, actively teetering on the absolute edge of a fatal financial cliff. He had completely overextended himself, trying to desperately impress a superficial social circle that would immediately abandon him the very second his platinum credit cards bounced. He foolishly thought he could successfully intimidate me by illegally freezing my personal checking account containing exactly $47. He had absolutely no idea that I was comfortably sitting on $45 million in pure liquid cash. I tapped my index finger against the complex financial flowchart, a new, highly aggressive strategy forming perfectly in my calculating mind. Who exactly holds the commercial debt on Jamal's failing real estate property? I asked, looking directly at the senior forensic accountant. The accountant quickly flipped to the next detailed page in his black binder. A mid-tier commercial lending institution called Apex Financial currently holds the paper. They strictly hold the primary mortgage and all the secondary construction loans. They are currently looking to desperately offload the toxic debt because they fully know Jamal is a massive, imminent default risk. They are quietly shopping the highly distressed debt portfolio to aggressive private equity buyers at a very steep discount, just to quickly get the toxic asset off their financial books. I looked directly at Beatrice, and a silent, powerful understanding immediately passed between us. Suing Jamal and Carol in federal court for massive wire fraud would certainly send them directly to a federal prison. But federal investigations painfully took many months, sometimes several long years, to fully execute and conclude. I absolutely did not want to wait several years for my rightful justice. I wanted to completely dismantle their pathetic, fraudulent lives right now, today. I wanted to ruthlessly strip them of the luxurious high society facade they valued significantly more than their own flesh and blood. Suing them would merely make me a weak victim, desperately seeking standard financial restitution. But aggressively buying Jamal's heavily distressed debt directly from his desperate commercial lenders would instantly make me his supreme commercial creditor. It would permanently give me the absolute unilateral power to mercilessly foreclose on all his assets and completely obliterate his entire financial existence with a single stroke of my pen. I firmly closed the thick manila folder and pushed it back across the smooth, polished mahogany table. I looked intensely at the specialized team of elite lawyers and brilliant accountants. Gentlemen, I said, my voice radiating absolute, unyielding corporate authority. We are not just going to passively hand this overwhelming evidence over to the federal authorities and quietly wait. We are going to aggressively execute a hostile financial takeover right now. Get me the senior executives at Apex Financial on the phone immediately. Nurture Core Holdings, LLC, is about to make a massive commercial real estate acquisition and completely destroy my sister. The large executive conference room erupted into a flurry of highly coordinated corporate action. Beatrice nodded sharply to her lead attorney, who immediately dialed the private direct line for the chief executive officer of Apex Financial. The call was placed on speakerphone, echoing through the polished mahogany conference room. When the executive answered, his voice was tight with the unmistakable strain of a man managing a sinking ship. He knew exactly why Beatrice was calling. He assumed the legendary real estate mogul was finally reaching out to ruthlessly exploit their financial exposure to Jamal and his rapidly failing commercial portfolio. He had absolutely no idea the actual apex predator in the room was the quiet woman sitting at the table holding a newborn baby. I leaned forward toward the speakerphone. I introduced myself simply as the executive director of Nurture Core Holdings. I did not use my real name. I kept my identity securely hidden behind the heavy corporate veil of my Delaware entity. I told the Apex executive that my firm was fully aware of the massive toxic debt currently weighing down their quarterly balance sheets. I formally offered to purchase the entire comprehensive portfolio of commercial loans, construction notes, and personal margin debt belonging to Jamal. I offered a brutal 30% discount on the dollar. The executive hesitated immediately, trying to leverage a better negotiating position by falsely claiming the commercial property still possessed significant long-term potential. I cut him off before he could even finish his deceptive sentence. I flawlessly recited the exact vacancy rates, the severe structural deficits of the failing shopping complex, and the impending catastrophic margin calls Jamal was facing by the end of the month. I told him he could either take my massive multi-million-dollar cash injection right now or watch his entire financial institution absorb a catastrophic total loss when Jamal inevitably filed for bankruptcy protection by the end of the week. The heavy, agonizing silence on the other end of the telephone line lasted for exactly 10 grueling seconds. I could practically hear the desperate calculations running through the executive's panicked mind. Finally, he completely caved to the intense financial pressure. He verbally agreed to the ruthless terms. The elite legal team immediately mobilized to draft the complex assignment of debt contracts. Within 2 highly focused hours, the digital ink on the binding corporate agreements was entirely dry. I logged back into my highly secure corporate banking portal. I confidently authorized a massive wire transfer from Nurture Core Holdings directly into the designated clearing accounts for Apex Financial. I watched the circular progress bar spin on the high-definition screen until the bright green confirmation checkmark appeared. The massive transaction was officially complete. Beatrice looked at me with a complex mixture of absolute awe and predatory approval. She knew exactly what I had just accomplished. I did not just plan to sue my abusive mother and my arrogant brother-in-law. Civil lawsuits were incredibly messy public affairs that gave the guilty defendants ample time to hide liquid assets and play the tragic victim in front of easily manipulated sympathetic judges. By aggressively purchasing the distressed debt, I completely bypassed the agonizing and unpredictable judicial delays. I was now the supreme legal creditor over their entire existence. I literally owned the paper on their fake, luxurious lives. I owned the primary mortgage on the massive suburban mansion where Brittany and Jamal hosted their lavish high society parties. I owned the underlying financing paper on their fleet of luxury imported vehicles. I owned the crushing construction loans holding up their entirely fraudulent commercial real estate empire. I effectively owned the very ground they arrogantly walked on. They were currently sitting in their expensive designer clothes, sipping imported wine, completely oblivious to the terrifying fact that the broke sister they continuously mocked held the absolute legal power to render them completely homeless with a single certified letter. I looked down at little Leo. He was sleeping so peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, calming rhythm. I gently stroked his soft, warm cheek, feeling a profound sense of absolute security wash over my tired, recovering body. My mother, Carol, had spent my entire life trying to violently control me through severe emotional manipulation and calculated financial withholding. She had constantly threatened to withdraw her highly conditional love if I did not perfectly submit to her endless narcissistic demands. Jamal had tried to physically starve me out by illegally freezing $47 in a generic checking account. They relied entirely on the pathetic illusion of power. I had just acquired the actual legal keys to their entire kingdom. The very moment Jamal inevitably missed his next scheduled debt payment, I would absolutely not send a polite customary reminder. I would unleash a fleet of ruthless corporate liquidators to legally seize every single asset he falsely claimed to own. I would strip them down completely to the absolute studs. While I was meticulously constructing the ultimate financial guillotine for my mother and sister, another severe threat was rapidly materializing. I finally left the high-rise corporate law firm and returned to my cramped, freezing apartment with Leo. I needed to quickly pack a few essential personal items before permanently relocating to a highly secure luxury penthouse Beatrice had quietly arranged for us. I carefully carried Leo in his infant car seat up the 3 flights of steep concrete stairs. When I reached my peeling wooden door, a stranger wearing a cheap beige suit was standing silently in the dimly lit hallway. He held a thick, heavy stack of sealed manila envelopes. He stepped forward and aggressively asked if my name was Anna. When I cautiously confirmed my identity, he forcefully shoved the heavy stack of legal papers directly into my chest and briskly walked away down the dark stairwell without uttering another single word. I quickly unlocked my door, secured Leo safely in his wooden crib, and frantically tore open the thick envelopes. The bold, intimidating legal header printed across the top page made my blood run instantly cold. It was an emergency ex parte custody petition officially filed in the county family court. Derek had actually followed through on his vile, cowardly threat. He was aggressively petitioning the court for immediate full physical and legal custody of my newborn son. I rapidly flipped through the dense legal filings, analytically dissecting the pathetic, fraudulent foundation of his entire case. Derek had built his entire legal argument by directly utilizing the malicious, highly orchestrated social media smear campaign Brittany had launched that exact same morning. He had prominently attached printed full-color screenshots of Brittany's fake Facebook and Instagram posts, claiming I was currently suffering from severe postpartum psychosis and experiencing dangerous violent delusions. Derek swore formally under the severe penalty of perjury that I was entirely destitute, living in absolute squalor, and completely mentally unfit to care for a vulnerable newborn infant. He falsely claimed he was a highly devoted, successful father who could easily provide a wonderfully stable, luxurious environment for his precious son. He meticulously painted himself as the desperate, heroic savior, bravely trying to rescue his innocent child from a deranged, poverty-stricken, unstable mother. He aggressively demanded the presiding family court judge grant an immediate emergency removal order before I could allegedly cause any irreversible physical harm to the helpless baby. Reading the utterly fabricated, horrific allegations sent a brief, paralyzing wave of pure maternal terror through my entire nervous system. The thought of heavily armed police officers violently knocking down my door to rip my 2-day-old son from my arms was suffocating. But the panic only lasted for a fleeting fraction of a second before the cold, calculating logic completely took over. I read the fabricated allegations again and actually felt a dark, terrifying laugh bubble up in my throat. Derek was incredibly arrogant, but he was also fundamentally remarkably stupid. He had blindly rushed directly to the family courthouse, entirely blinded by the completely false rumor that I currently possessed a multi-million-dollar personal trust fund he could somehow easily access through aggressive child support channels. He genuinely thought he was launching a brilliant preemptive legal strike based entirely on my highly public reputation as a broke, struggling, helpless victim. He had absolutely no idea that I had just spent the entire morning sitting in a billionaire real estate mogul's elite boardroom, aggressively executing 9-figure corporate financial acquisitions. He had no idea the woman he was trying to legally obliterate possessed more liquid capital than his entire corporate firm. He had just blindly walked directly into a brutal family court slaughterhouse. In his desperate, greedy rush to steal my child and access my rumored wealth, Derek had officially submitted a legally binding sworn affidavit declaring his own massive financial superiority while entirely falsely characterizing my financial status. He had boldly committed blatant, undeniable perjury on a federal legal document. I calmly picked up my encrypted phone and directly dialed the elite high-powered family law attorney Beatrice had thoughtfully placed on immediate standby. I briefly explained the incredibly foolish legal maneuver my ex-husband had just attempted. I explicitly told the veteran litigator to immediately prepare for an absolute bloodbath in family court. Derek wanted to play dirty legal games to forcefully steal my newborn son. I was going to let him step confidently right into the courtroom and then completely obliterate his entire future permanently without mercy or hesitation. The heavy oak doors of the Cook County Family Court swung open with a resounding thud. I stepped into the brightly lit courtroom projecting absolute unyielding confidence. I wore a tailored black wool suit that commanded immediate respect. Beside me walked Victor Harrison, one of the most feared and brutally effective family law litigators in the entire Midwest. Beatrice had deployed him specifically for this exact moment. He carried a single sleek leather briefcase containing the financial nuclear codes that would permanently end my ex-husband's pathetic existence. I scanned the gallery seating behind the plaintiff's table. My mother Carol and my sister Brittany were already sitting there perched on the wooden benches like eager vultures waiting for a fresh carcass. Carol wore a completely inappropriate bright floral designer dress, trying desperately to look like the wealthy, concerned grandmother. Brittany sat next to her, furiously typing on her phone, likely drafting another fake social media update about my impending legal destruction. When they saw me walk down the center aisle, they exchanged smug, vicious smiles. They genuinely believed I was walking into an absolute slaughterhouse. They thought I was a broken, destitute woman arriving to inevitably surrender my newborn child. I stared right back at them, keeping my expression entirely blank and terrifyingly cold. Their smug smiles faltered for just a fraction of a second when they noticed my expensive tailored suit, but they quickly recovered their arrogant posture. I took my seat at the defense table, keeping my posture perfectly straight. Derek sat less than 10 feet away from me. He wore a rented navy suit that fit poorly across his broad shoulders, exposing his desperate attempt to look like a wealthy executive. He refused to make direct eye contact with me, instead whispering nervously to his attorney. His lawyer was a loud, overly aggressive man named Thomas Klein, who built his entire local reputation on bullying vulnerable mothers in family court. Klein was aggressively shuffling through a massive stack of disorganized papers, trying to look highly prepared and intimidating. Judge Montgomery, a stern, no-nonsense woman with decades of family court experience, took the bench. She slammed her wooden gavel down, signaling the immediate commencement of the emergency ex parte custody hearing. She looked over her reading glasses, scanning the courtroom with a sharp, critical eye. "State your appearances," she ordered, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. Klein immediately jumped to his feet, puffing out his chest. Thomas Klein, representing the petitioner, Derek. Your Honor, we are here today requesting immediate full physical and legal custody of the minor child Leo. My client is a devoted, highly successful father, desperately trying to rescue his newborn son from an incredibly dangerous and completely unstable environment. Victor Harrison stood up slowly, deliberately buttoning his expensive suit jacket. Victor Harrison, representing the respondent Anna. The defense is fully prepared to proceed, Your Honor. Judge Montgomery nodded sharply, adjusting her thick black robes. Proceed, Mr. Klein. Keep your opening arguments extremely brief and strictly factual. This is an expedited emergency hearing, and my time is incredibly valuable today. Klein practically sprinted to the center podium. Your Honor, the respondent is currently suffering from a severe unmedicated episode of postpartum psychosis. She is completely delusional, highly erratic, and utterly destitute. Just 48 hours ago, her own family members were forced to publicly seek help on social media due to her violent, unpredictable behavior. She is currently living in absolute squalor in a freezing, unheated apartment. Furthermore, we have absolute documented proof that she is entirely financially bankrupt. Just yesterday morning, her personal debit card was aggressively declined for a mere $30 grocery transaction. Her bank accounts are frozen by the bank due to suspicious activity. She cannot even afford basic infant formula for the child. Leaving a newborn child in her care is gross negligence and a severe threat to the child's immediate physical safety. I sat perfectly still next to Harrison. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I did not object to the blatant, vicious lies spilling out of Klein's mouth. Harrison had explicitly instructed me to remain completely silent and let them talk freely. We needed Derek to formally submit these completely fabricated claims into the official court record under the severe penalty of federal perjury. "I call my client to the stand," Klein announced, gesturing dramatically toward Derek. Derek quickly walked up to the witness box, placing his hand on the Bible and swearing to tell the absolute truth. He sat down, adjusting his cheap tie, trying to look deeply devastated and incredibly responsible. He finally glanced in my direction, offering a pathetic, theatrical look of deep sorrow, before turning his attention directly to the judge. Derek Klein began pacing back and forth in front of the witness stand. "Can you please describe your current financial status and your ability to properly care for your infant son?" Derek leaned into the microphone, putting on his best performance. "I am a highly successful corporate executive, Your Honor. I make a very lucrative six-figure salary. I live in a secure, luxury apartment building with a fully furnished nursery waiting for my son. I can easily provide Leo with private medical care, elite child care, and a completely stable, wealthy environment. I have significant liquid savings and zero debt. I am fully prepared to financially support him entirely on my own without any assistance from the state or the mother." It was a breathtaking string of absolute lies. I knew for a fact Derek was heavily in debt from his expensive sports car lease and his excessive luxury spending habits. He had recklessly maxed out multiple high-limit credit cards to exclusively fund his selfish, luxurious lifestyle immediately after cruelly abandoning me in my most vulnerable state. He was barely holding on to a mid-level management position, and his luxury apartment was heavily subsidized by his latest girlfriend. He was brazenly committing massive perjury right to the judge's face, entirely blinded by his arrogant belief that my own supposed poverty would prevent anyone from properly investigating his fake financial claims. He felt completely untouchable. "And what about your ex-wife?" Klein asked, pointing a dramatic finger directly at me. "What is her current financial situation and mental state?" Derek let out a heavy, theatrical sigh, shaking his head sadly. "Anna is completely broke, Your Honor. She refuses to work. She has no ambition to improve her life. She lives in a run-down, dangerous building with faulty heating. I tried to help her financially, but she became completely hostile and verbally abusive toward me. She is experiencing severe dangerous delusions, refusing to accept reality. Her own mother and sister are sitting in the gallery right now, completely terrified for the safety of my son. She cannot provide even the most basic necessities for a newborn baby. I am begging the court to let me take my son home where he belongs, safely away from her toxic influence." I slowly turned my head and looked back at the gallery. Carol and Brittany were nodding fervently along with Derek's testimony, playing the role of the deeply concerned, terrified family members. Brittany actually pulled a tissue from her designer bag and dabbed at her dry eyes, putting on an absolutely sickening performance for the court. They were actively participating in a coordinated, vicious attempt to steal my newborn child just to hurt me. The sheer, unbelievable evil of their malicious actions completely solidified every single strategic plan I had meticulously made in the shadows over the past few grueling days. I felt absolutely no guilt for the catastrophic financial destruction I was about to unleash upon them. They had crossed the ultimate line. "Thank you," Derek Klein said, turning to the judge with a smug, victorious smile. "Your Honor, the facts are absolutely clear today. The mother is completely broke, emotionally unstable, and inherently dangerous. The father is independently wealthy, professionally stable, and deeply devoted to the child's absolute best welfare. We request immediate execution of the emergency removal order to place the infant securely in my client's loving care." Judge Montgomery looked down at her dense notes, her expression tight and unreadable. The courtroom held a heavy, suffocating silence as everyone waited for her response. She slowly turned her gaze to the defense table, adjusting her glasses. Mr. Harrison, do you wish to cross-examine the witness before I issue my preliminary ruling? Victor Harrison stood up, picking up a single thick manila folder from our table. He walked slowly toward the podium, his expensive leather shoes echoing loudly in the quiet, expectant courtroom. He did not look angry. He looked like a lethal apex predator who had just successfully trapped his foolish prey in an inescapable corner. He placed the heavy folder onto the wooden podium, deliberately dragging out the agonizing suspense. Yes, Your Honor. Harrison stated, his voice smooth and incredibly dangerous, slicing through the heavy silence. I have just a few brief questions for the petitioner regarding his sworn financial testimony today. I believe the court will find his statements highly illuminating once we review the actual documented facts regarding both his financial status and the tremendous corporate assets belonging exclusively to my highly successful client. Harrison stared directly into Derek's terrified eyes, letting the immense weight of the impending destruction settle over the room. The smug, confident smile completely vanished from Klein's face. The devastating legal trap was now perfectly set, waiting to snap shut. Derek had just blindly handed us the absolute power to legally and financially ruin him permanently, without any possibility of a future recovery. Harrison opened the thick manila folder resting on the wooden podium. He pulled out a crisp, highly detailed financial spreadsheet. Mr. Klein's client just testified under oath that he possesses significant liquid savings and zero debt. He claimed he lives in a luxury apartment and can easily provide for the child independently. Is that your sworn testimony today, Derek? Derek swallowed hard, a visible bead of sweat tracing down his temple. Yes, he muttered into the microphone, his voice lacking its previous arrogant conviction. Harrison took a slow, deliberate step toward the witness stand. You also testified that my client Anna is completely destitute. You based this severe accusation on a declined debit card transaction and malicious social media posts. You boldly claim she cannot afford basic infant formula. That is correct, Derek answered, trying desperately to regain his false bravado. She is completely broke. Everyone knows it. Fascinating, Harrison remarked smoothly, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. He turned his sharp attention to Judge Montgomery. Your Honor, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit A into the official court record. These are the petitioner's certified financial records obtained legally during our expedited discovery process. Harrison handed a thick stack of bank documents to the bailiff, who promptly passed them up to the judge. You will see clearly, Your Honor, that Derek does not own his luxury apartment. The lease is solely in the name of his current girlfriend. Furthermore, Derek has absolutely zero liquid savings. He is currently carrying $85,000 in high-interest credit card debt, primarily originating from luxury car leases, expensive tailoring, and international vacations. He is living paycheck to paycheck, heavily subsidized by his new partner, and is currently 2 months behind on his own vehicle payments. Klein jumped up, his face flushing dark red. Objection. This is a gross mischaracterization of my client's temporary cash flow. Overruled. Judge Montgomery snapped harshly, her eyes rapidly scanning the certified financial documents. These are verified federal bank records, Mr. Klein. Sit down and remain silent. Derek gripped the edges of the witness stand, his knuckles turning stark white. His face shifted to a sickly shade of gray. The entire courtroom watched intently as his fabricated, wealthy executive persona disintegrated into pathetic ashes in a matter of seconds. Now, Harrison continued, his voice echoing with absolute terrifying authority, let us address the vicious, highly calculated perjury regarding my client's financial status. Harrison pulled a second, much thicker bound document from his leather briefcase. He handed it confidently to the bailiff. Your Honor, I am submitting Defense Exhibit B. These are the federally certified corporate tax returns, verified commercial banking statements, and the current official independent market valuation for NurtureCore Holdings, LLC, a Delaware-registered corporation. Judge Montgomery opened the heavy bound document. She adjusted her reading glasses, scanning the first executive summary page. Her strict, impassive judicial expression suddenly broke. Her eyebrows shot up in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. She looked sharply from the paperwork to me, sitting quietly and impeccably dressed at the defense table, and then looked back down at the financial summary. Mr. Harrison, the judge said, her voice dropping to a stunned, echoing whisper. Are you stating for the official court record that the respondent is the sole owner and chief executive of this massive commercial corporation? That is absolutely correct, Your Honor, Harrison confirmed proudly, projecting his voice across the room. My client Anna built NurtureCore completely from scratch over the past 5 grueling years. She maintained strict corporate anonymity specifically to protect her assets from aggressive financial predators like the man sitting in the witness box. The documents you are holding verify that her company recently received a baseline market valuation of $45 million. Her personal and corporate accounts currently hold massive liquid cash reserves. She possesses exclusive unilateral control over this entire financial empire. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom gallery. I did not turn around, but I could practically feel the suffocating shock and rising panic radiating from the wooden benches where my mother and sister sat. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and incredibly satisfying. The $30 declined debit card transaction the petitioner heavily referenced, Harrison explained smoothly, was from a generic checking account my client abandoned years ago. She uses it exclusively for minor automated subscriptions. Her actual operating capital is managed through elite-tier commercial banking institutions. The petitioner's claim that she cannot afford infant formula is not just a lie. It is a spectacular, malicious absurdity designed to steal a child. Judge Montgomery slowly closed the heavy financial dossier, the sound echoing like a gunshot. She turned her piercing, furious gaze directly onto Derek. He shrank back into the wooden chair, looking like he desperately wanted the floorboards to open up and swallow him whole. Mr. Klein, the judge said, her voice radiating pure, unfiltered judicial wrath. Your client came into my courtroom today and committed blatant, calculated perjury. He swore under oath that he was financially superior to a woman who possesses a net worth exponentially larger than his entire lifetime earning potential. He attempted to weaponize the family court system using fabricated social media posts and outright lies to violently steal a newborn child from a highly successful, exceptionally stable mother. Klein stood up, stammering uncontrollably, his face sweating profusely. Your Honor, my client was misinformed. We relied entirely on statements from the mother's family members. You relied on malicious gossip and completely failed to do even the most basic preliminary financial discovery. Judge Montgomery fired back, shutting the lawyer down instantly. This court has zero tolerance for individuals who attempt to blindly manipulate the legal system for greedy, vindictive purposes. She turned her full attention back to Derek. You abandoned this woman when she was 5 months pregnant. You provided zero financial or emotional support during the most vulnerable period of her life. You explicitly refused to pay the hospital bill for your own son's birth just days ago. And now, clearly blinded by the false rumor of a trust fund, you aggressively rush into my courtroom, trying to rip a 2-day-old infant from his mother's arms. Your Honor, I just want to be a father, Derek pleaded weakly, his voice cracking with desperate, pathetic panic. Do not insult my intelligence, Judge Montgomery snapped, pointing her gavel at him. You do not want to be a father. You want to be a parasite. You wanted to use this innocent child as a financial pawn to extort money from a woman you previously discarded because you falsely believed she lacked ambition. The judge picked up her wooden gavel, gripping it tightly. I am throwing out the petitioner's motion for emergency custody entirely. Furthermore, based on the documented evidence of severe financial perjury, gross manipulation, and the admitted abandonment of the child prior to birth, I am heavily restricting the petitioner's parental rights. Derek will have absolutely zero physical or legal custody of the minor child Leo. Derek gasped, covering his mouth. You will be granted zero visitation rights, pending a comprehensive psychological evaluation and a mandatory 6-month parenting rehabilitation course, all at your own personal expense, the judge continued relentlessly. Child support will be calculated based on your corporate salary, and it will be aggressively garnished. Derek let out a choked, desperate sob. He gripped his hair, looking frantically at his lawyer. But Klein was already packing his battered briefcase, desperately trying to physically distance himself from the catastrophic disaster he had walked into. But we are not finished, Judge Montgomery stated, her tone relentless and unforgiving. This lawsuit was a frivolous, malicious abuse of the judicial process. It was designed to harass and intimidate a mother recovering from childbirth. Therefore, I am ordering the petitioner Derek to pay 100% of the respondent's legal fees. Given the high caliber of Mr. Harrison's corporate firm, I expect that invoice will be exorbitant. You will pay it in full within 30 days, or I will authorize the immediate seizure of your remaining assets and the garnishment of your corporate wages. The gavel slammed down onto the wooden block with a deafening crack. This hearing is adjourned. Derek physically collapsed. His knees gave out and he sank heavily into the wooden chair at the plaintiff's table. He buried his face in his trembling hands, completely shattered. The massive legal fees he was just ordered to pay would easily push him into immediate, inescapable bankruptcy. He had gambled his entire existence on stealing my money, and he had just lost absolutely everything. His fake luxury lifestyle, his arrogant corporate persona, his entire future was completely obliterated by a single swing of the judge's gavel. I finally turned around in my seat to look at the gallery. Carol and Brittany were standing up, their faces pale and twisted with pure, unadulterated horror. They had just watched a federal judge confirm that the daughter they abused, the sister they endlessly mocked, was a multimillionaire possessing a $45 million empire. They realized in real time that their social media smear campaign had just failed spectacularly. They realized I possessed the unlimited capital to legally crush them for the wire fraud they committed. Brittany grabbed her expensive handbag, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. Carol looked directly into my eyes for one fleeting second. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just stared back with cold, empty resolve. Carol visibly recoiled, stumbling backward into the wooden bench. They did not wait for the bailiff to clear the room. They turned and practically ran out of the courtroom, pushing frantically through the heavy oak doors to escape the absolute carnage they had just witnessed. I stood up, adjusting my tailored black suit. Victor Harrison packed his sleek leather briefcase, offering me a slight, deeply respectful nod. We walked down the center aisle of the courtroom in silence, passing the broken, sobbing shell of my ex-husband. We walked out of the building and stepped into the crisp, cold Chicago air. I hailed a premium car service ready to return to my son. The battle with Derek was permanently finished. Now it was time to finalize the ultimate destruction of Carol and Jamal. Jamal and Carol were entirely blinded by their own extreme arrogance. Instead of liquidating their remaining assets or fleeing the country, they foolishly decided to double down on their fake high society image. News of the devastating custody battle disaster had not reached their elite social circles yet, but Jamal knew Beatrice was aggressively investigating the trust fund. In his desperate, heavily leveraged mind, the only logical defense was to aggressively project absolute financial invincibility. He convinced Carol and Brittany that if they threw the most lavish, opulent charity gala the city had seen in a decade, Beatrice would be far too intimidated by their immense social power to pursue any federal litigation. They believed wealthy people did not sue other wealthy people if it risked mutually assured public embarrassment. They were relying on the old, outdated rules of high society, where financial scandals were quietly swept under expensive rugs. They recklessly poured the last remaining drops of their stolen cash and maxed out their rapidly shrinking credit lines to rent the grand ballroom at the most exclusive luxury hotel in downtown Chicago. They hired elite caterers, imported rare floral arrangements from Europe, and secured a high-profile guest list featuring local politicians, wealthy socialites, and major commercial investors. Jamal desperately needed this gala to secure new investors to bail out his sinking commercial real estate portfolio. He planned to use the charitable donations as a smokescreen to illegally funnel fresh capital into his failing margin accounts. Jamal specifically invited the exact bank executives who held the secondary notes on his failing properties, believing that showering them with expensive caviar would magically extend his credit lines. Brittany was equally delusional, spending hours coordinating her designer gown, with Carol trying to ensure they dominated the society pages the following morning. They were aggressively polishing the brass on the Titanic, completely unaware that the ship had already hit the iceberg and the lower decks were entirely flooded. He genuinely thought flashing expensive champagne and designer tuxedos would magically erase the catastrophic debt waiting on his desk. He had absolutely no idea that the silent, invisible buyer who had just ruthlessly swallowed all his toxic commercial debt was the exact same woman he had mocked in a public hospital just a few days prior. While Jamal and Carol were busy picking out expensive ice sculptures and dictating seating charts, I was sitting in a highly secure, soundproof boardroom at the Federal Building. Beatrice sat at my right hand, radiating absolute authority. Across the long steel table sat three specialized federal agents from the White Collar Crime Division and a senior prosecutor from the United States Attorney's Office. They were meticulously reviewing the dense financial dossiers my corporate attorneys had compiled. The lead investigator, a sharp analytical man with piercing eyes, carefully outlined the impending federal sting operation. "We have everything we need to move forward," he stated, tapping a thick stack of wire transfer records. "The evidence of federal wire fraud and the forgery of the power of attorney document is absolute." Jamal routed the stolen trust funds across state lines through his brokerage firm, directly violating numerous federal banking regulations. He also attempted to defraud commercial lenders by wildly inflating his assets. The United States attorney running the case emphasized that Jamal's actions were a textbook example of arrogant white-collar crime. He had left a highly visible digital paper trail across multiple banking institutions, mistakenly believing his status shielded him from standard federal oversight. Given the overwhelming evidence, we have already secured a sealed federal indictment from the grand jury. Beatrice leaned forward, resting her hands on her silver-handled cane. "And the arrest?" she asked, her voice perfectly level, displaying no hesitation. The lead agent nodded sharply. "We are executing the arrest warrants tonight at the charity gala. We want to maximize the shock value and prevent any possibility of him fleeing or destroying digital evidence at his brokerage firm. Our plainclothes agents are already seamlessly integrated into the event security team and the catering staff. We control all the exits. We are not just seizing his accounts," the prosecutor confirmed, adjusting his glasses. "We are seizing the entire suburban mansion, the luxury vehicles, and any physical assets purchased with the stolen trust disbursements. They will leave that gala with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs." I looked at the detailed floor plan of the grand ballroom spread out on the table. Jamal was planning to take the stage at 9 o'clock to deliver a keynote speech about his fake philanthropic efforts. That was the exact moment I planned to drop the financial guillotine. I confirmed the timeline with the federal agents, ensuring my corporate lawyers were fully prepared to simultaneously serve the foreclosure notices and asset seizure documents. We were not just going to arrest him. We were going to publicly obliterate his entire financial existence in front of the exact high society audience he worshipped. The trap was flawlessly set. Jamal had arrogantly built a massive house of cards using my stolen money, and tonight I was going to pull out the foundational piece on live microphones. I returned to the highly secure luxury penthouse Beatrice had provided. The sprawling space overlooked the glittering Chicago skyline, a stark, beautiful contrast to the freezing, cramped apartment I had occupied just days ago. A private nanny, highly vetted and thoroughly trusted, was rocking Leo to sleep in a warm, beautifully decorated nursery. I kissed his soft forehead, feeling a fierce, protective energy surge through my veins. I was going to war tonight to ensure he would never experience a single day of the poverty or abuse I had endured. I walked into the massive master suite, where a team of elite stylists Beatrice had hired was waiting for me. For years, I had deliberately worn faded thrift store clothing, hiding my massive wealth behind frayed collars and scuffed shoes. That era was completely finished. Tonight, I was stepping out of the shadows and claiming my rightful place at the absolute top of the food chain. I was not attending this gala as the pathetic broken sister. I was arriving as the supreme corporate creditor and the billionaire heiress. I slipped into a custom-tailored emerald green silk gown that fit my recovering body with flawless architectural precision. The fabric moved like liquid armor, radiating cold, untouchable power. The rich color complemented my skin tone perfectly, commanding immediate attention without begging for it. The stylist pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe chignon, exposing my face completely. There was no soft makeup or vulnerable styling. My makeup was striking and razor-sharp, featuring a deep, bold lip color that signaled absolute authority. Beatrice entered the suite as I was clasping a heavy diamond necklace around my throat. The diamonds were flawless, refracting the ambient light with blinding clarity, representing generations of family wealth that Carol had tried to steal. Beatrice looked at me, her eyes shining with immense pride. She wore a tailored black velvet suit, leaning on her cane with regal grace. "You look magnificent, Anna," she said, her voice filled with quiet awe. "You look exactly like the woman who built a $45 million empire from a tiny apartment. You look like a woman who owns the room before she even steps inside." I looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The woman staring back was a complete stranger to the family who had abused her. She was a lethal, highly calculating chief executive officer, preparing to orchestrate a hostile takeover. I felt absolutely no fear. I felt no lingering attachment to the mother who had stolen from me or the sister who had endlessly mocked me. I felt only a pure, cold, driving need for absolute justice. They had relentlessly tried to break my spirit and steal my son's future. Tonight, they would pay the ultimate price. "It is time," I stated, turning away from the mirror. We took the private elevator down to the secure underground parking garage. A fleet of black armored SUVs was waiting with their engines idling softly. Federal agents discreetly positioned themselves in the front and rear vehicles, establishing a highly secure motorcade. I stepped into the back of the center vehicle with Beatrice sinking into the plush leather seats. The tinted windows shielded us from the outside world, creating a quiet, pressurized cabin of anticipation. I adjusted the cuffs of the emerald gown, feeling the cool, heavy silk settle against my wrists. I glanced down at the sleek leather portfolio resting on the vehicle seat next to me. It contained the certified foreclosure documents, the asset seizure warrants, and the absolute proof of my legal supremacy over their entire fraudulent empire. The motorcade pulled out into the freezing Chicago night, smoothly joining the heavy city traffic. I watched the city lights blur past the window, calculating every single verbal strike I was about to deliver. Carol and Jamal thought their luxurious gala was the ultimate shield against the consequences of their massive crimes. They genuinely believed that hiding behind expensive champagne and wealthy guests made them completely untouchable. They were about to learn a devastating lesson about real power. Real power did not need to shout or brag or post fake pictures on social media. Real power moved quietly in the shadows, aggressively buying up all the debt until it legally owned the entire board. The ride to the luxury hotel felt incredibly fast. My heartbeat remained completely steady. I was not walking into a family reunion. I was walking into a corporate liquidation. And tonight, the silent owner was finally stepping into the light to collect her absolute dues. The motorcade pulled smoothly into the circular driveway of the luxury hotel, seamlessly blending in with the line of expensive imported vehicles discharging high society guests. The valet staff moved quickly to open the doors. I stepped out onto the polished pavement, the crisp winter air hitting my face. Beatrice emerged from the vehicle beside me, leaning lightly on her silver-handled cane, her presence commanding immediate deference from the hotel staff. The plainclothes federal agents and elite corporate litigators fanned out, forming a highly secure, discreet perimeter around us. They moved with the quiet, lethal efficiency of professionals executing a highly coordinated tactical strike. We bypassed the main lobby entirely, utilizing a private service elevator the FBI had secured in advance, specifically to avoid any premature detection. The elevator ascended rapidly toward the grand ballroom. The silence inside the cabin was thick, charged with an electric anticipation. I adjusted the heavy diamond necklace resting against my collarbone, ensuring it sat perfectly. I was completely composed, feeling the exact same icy, focused calm I experienced right before aggressively closing a massive corporate merger. There was no hesitation left in me. The scared, exhausted mother begging for hospital bills was a ghost of the past. The woman riding this elevator was a $45 million apex predator ready to completely dismantle her prey. The elevator doors chimed and slid open, revealing a sprawling, opulent foyer located just outside the main ballroom doors. The area was lavishly decorated with towering crystal centerpieces and cascading white orchids. Waiters in crisp black tuxedos circulated silently, carrying silver trays laden with expensive champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The muffled sound of a live string quartet drifted through the heavy oak doors, signaling the extravagant scale of the event inside. A federal agent discreetly tapped his earpiece, confirming the tactical positions of the undercover operatives already stationed inside the ballroom. "The target is currently on stage," the agent murmured to the federal prosecutor standing near Beatrice. "He is halfway through his keynote address, addressing the primary investor groups. The timing is absolutely optimal." Beatrice nodded sharply, her eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. "We proceed immediately," she commanded, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Anna, you lead the way. We follow your exact cue." I approached the massive double oak doors of the grand ballroom. Two uniformed hotel attendants immediately reached for the brass handles. I offered them a brief, polite nod, and they pulled the heavy doors open simultaneously. The immediate sensory assault of the gala washed over me. The room was breathtakingly opulent, bathed in warm golden light from dozens of massive crystal chandeliers. Hundreds of Chicago's wealthiest elites sat at circular tables draped in heavy silk, listening attentively. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasted truffles, and unadulterated, arrogant wealth. At the far end of the massive room, elevated on a raised platform, stood Jamal. He wore a custom-tailored white tuxedo jacket, completely leaning into his fabricated role as a high-society philanthropic mogul. He held a microphone tightly in his right hand, pacing the stage with aggressive, practiced confidence. A massive digital screen behind him displayed his brokerage firm's logo in bold, glowing letters. "We are not just managing wealth tonight," he boasted into the microphone, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We are actively building legacy. We are aggressively expanding our commercial footprint, revitalizing distressed properties, and transforming them into premier luxury retail destinations. My firm operates on a foundational principle of unyielding, aggressive expansion. We do not just participate in the market, we absolutely dominate it." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his lies was genuinely staggering. He was standing in front of major commercial investors, aggressively bragging about dominating the market while desperately drowning in highly toxic margin debt built entirely on my stolen trust fund. He was aggressively pitching his failing commercial portfolio to the exact banking executives whose toxic debt I had just ruthlessly purchased at a severe discount. He was a dead man, proudly dancing on his own financial grave. I stepped fully into the ballroom, my emerald silk gown rustling softly against the thick carpet. Beatrice walked slowly but powerfully beside me, her silver cane striking the floor with rhythmic authority. The elite team of federal agents and corporate litigators followed closely behind us, moving in a tight, synchronized formation that immediately signaled severe legal trouble. As we moved down the main center aisle, the luxurious atmosphere of the gala began to rapidly fracture. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing their bows, freezing mid-stroke as they noticed the severe, heavily armed presence of the federal agents. A profound, heavy silence cascaded through the massive room, starting from the back doors and quickly rippling toward the front stage. Heads turned. Whispers erupted. Guests lowered their champagne flutes, staring in shock at the imposing, highly coordinated group disrupting the event. Jamal paused mid-sentence, noticing the sudden total silence in the room. He squinted against the bright stage lights, trying to see past the front rows. When his eyes finally locked onto our group moving steadily down the center aisle, his confident, arrogant posture completely collapsed. The microphone slipped slightly in his hand, producing a sharp, jarring screech of audio feedback that made several guests flinch. He recognized Beatrice instantly, and then a second later he recognized me. The blood rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly gray color. He took a stumbling, terrified step backward on the stage, fully realizing the catastrophic magnitude of the impending disaster. From a table near this front row, my mother Carol suddenly jumped up. She wore a gaudy, heavily beaded gold gown that screamed desperate new money. Her face twisted into a mask of pure panic and vicious anger when she saw me walking alongside Beatrice. She immediately realized her carefully constructed high society facade was facing imminent total public destruction. She practically sprinted away from her table, pushing past several wealthy guests to intercept us before we could reach the front of the room. She aggressively blocked my path, holding her hands up in a desperate, frantic gesture. "What do you think you are doing?" Carol hissed, her voice a harsh, strained whisper, keeping her volume low to desperately avoid drawing more attention. "You cannot be here, Anna. Beatrice, you need to leave immediately. This is a highly exclusive private charity event. You are actively embarrassing the family in front of major civic leaders and investors. You are ruining Jamal's vital keynote presentation. If you leave quietly right now, I promise we will sit down and discuss whatever minor financial misunderstandings you think you have discovered." I did not stop walking. I did not even slow my pace. I simply continued moving forward, forcing Carol to awkwardly stumble backward in her high heels to avoid being physically run over by the sheer momentum of our group. "There is absolutely no misunderstanding, Mother," I stated, my voice perfectly calm, cold, and incredibly loud, slicing through the dead silence of the ballroom. "There is only massive federal wire fraud, severe elder abuse, and the absolute legal destruction of your pathetic fake lives. Now step aside before these federal agents physically remove you for obstructing a massive active criminal investigation." Carol gasped, clutching her chest in dramatic horror. She looked wildly at the plainclothes agents flanking me, finally noticing the severe federal badges clipped to their belts. She froze, completely paralyzed by the terrifying reality of the situation. I stepped smoothly past her, leaving her trembling violently in the center aisle. I did not walk toward the stage where Jamal stood sweating profusely and gripping the microphone like a lifeline. I walked deliberately toward the sophisticated audio-visual control booth situated perfectly at the front corner of the massive room. The technician manning the complex soundboard looked up with wide, terrified eyes as I approached, flanked by two imposing federal agents. "Step away from the console," the lead federal agent instructed the technician, firmly flashing his official badge. "This is an active federal operation." The technician immediately threw his hands up in surrender and scrambled out of his chair, backing away from the expensive electronic equipment without a single word of protest. I smoothly took his place at the control console. I reached into my sleek designer clutch and pulled out a small encrypted silver USB drive. It contained the absolute ultimate financial weapon I had meticulously prepared with Beatrice's elite forensic accountants. It held the raw, undeniable proof of their crimes formatted for maximum devastating public exposure. I inserted the USB drive directly into the primary control terminal. I rapidly navigated the complex presentation software using the same ruthless efficiency I used to manage my massive corporate empire. I bypassed Jamal's pathetic slideshow of fake charitable contributions and aggressively accessed the primary display controls. Jamal was still standing frozen on the stage, watching me with wide, terrified eyes. He opened his mouth, attempting to salvage the catastrophic situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, his voice shaking wildly over the audio system. "There seems to be a minor technical interruption. Please remain seated while we briefly resolve this minor scheduling issue." He was desperately lying until the very bitter end. He thought he could somehow talk his way out of a highly coordinated federal takedown. He genuinely believed his slick broker charm could effectively defuse the massive financial bomb I was currently arming. He had absolutely no idea that I held the detonator, and I was fully prepared to press the button. I looked up from the control console, making direct, intense eye contact with the man who had tried to starve me out of my apartment by freezing $47. I placed my finger firmly over the enter key on the keyboard, preparing to execute the final command. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. I pressed the key. The massive digital screens behind Jamal instantly went black before exploding into a blinding display of devastating financial truth. The bloody gala was officially underway. The screens illuminated with blinding light. Jamal shielded his eyes as his crimes broadcast to the Chicago elite. The first slide displayed forged power of attorney documents beside my actual signature. A red circle highlighted the fraudulent notary stamp. The audience gasped. I pressed the spacebar. A financial flowchart mapped the stolen trust fund money. It showed millions bleeding out of my blind trust filtering through Jamal's brokerage firm into failing commercial real estate ventures. I walked toward the stage, picking up a wireless microphone. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting with icy precision. "My name is Anna. I am the woman Jamal and Brittany spent the past 48 hours publicly smearing on social media as a broke, delusional psychiatric patient. As you can see on the screens behind him, I am not delusional. I am the rightful owner of the $9 million he embezzled to fund this pathetic illusion of wealth." Jamal gripped his microphone desperately, trying to interrupt me. "Turn that off!" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "Security, remove her immediately. She is making wild, fabricated accusations." Nobody moved. The hotel security staff had already been briefed by federal agents to stand down. The wealthy investors in the audience were staring at him with mounting disgust. They recognized legitimate financial documents when they saw them. They knew they were looking at a dead man walking. I continued speaking, unbothered by his shouting. Jamal loves to boast about his aggressive market expansion. I pointed directly at the massive screens. His leaked internal ledgers clearly demonstrate he is currently drowning in highly toxic debt. He illegally leveraged my stolen trust funds to purchase a dying strip mall. When the anchor tenants broke their leases, he desperately took out massive margin loans to avoid default. He is entirely bankrupt. I took a deliberate step closer to the stage, staring directly into Jamal's terrified eyes. But the most interesting part of this financial tragedy is who currently owns that toxic debt, I stated, my voice dropping to a lethal quiet pitch. The screen shifted, displaying a certified legal assignment of debt. The document clearly showed that Nurture Core Holdings, LLC, had aggressively purchased all of Jamal's commercial and personal debt at a severe discount from his lenders just hours ago. Jamal stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked from the massive document down to me, finally connecting the terrifying dots. "Yes, Jamal," I confirmed, offering a cold, merciless smile. "I am the sole founder and chief executive officer of Nurture Core Holdings. I built an empire while you were busy buying designer watches with my stolen money. I am your supreme commercial creditor. I legally own the paper on your entire fraudulent existence." Brittany jumped up from her table, her face contorted with panic. "You cannot do this," she screamed, her voice shrill and grating. "We are family, Anna. You cannot just take our things." I turned my head slowly to look at my sister. "I am not taking your things, Brittany," I corrected her with surgical precision. "I am legally reclaiming my own assets. As the primary lien holder on your residence, I am officially notifying you in front of your entire social circle that I am foreclosing on your suburban mansion effective immediately. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises before my liquidators change the locks and seize the property." Brittany's knees buckled. She collapsed into her chair, letting out a loud, hysterical sob. The high society guests she had desperately tried to impress were now actively whispering and pointing at her, their faces full of judgment and scorn. They were officially pariahs. Jamal dropped his microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a loud, jarring thud. He took a sudden, desperate step backward, preparing to flee the building. He had finally realized that his silver tongue could not save him from the absolute financial slaughterhouse I had constructed. Before Jamal could take a second step, the lead federal investigator signaled his team. 3 plainclothes FBI agents instantly moved forward. They bounded up the short staircase onto the stage, completely surrounding Jamal. They aggressively grabbed his arms, forcing them behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the silent ballroom was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. "Jamal, you are under federal arrest," the lead agent stated, his voice loud and strictly authoritative. "You are being charged with federal wire fraud and the fabrication of a federal power of attorney document. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." Jamal struggled weakly against the tight steel cuffs, his carefully constructed affluent persona entirely shattered. He looked down at the wealthy investors he had desperately tried to impress just 10 minutes ago. They were actively turning their backs on him, avoiding any eye contact. The agents forcefully escorted him down the stage stairs toward the main exit. Brittany let out a blood-curdling scream, watching her husband being hauled away in handcuffs. She scrambled out of her chair, slipping on the polished floor. Jamal, she wailed, reaching out desperately toward the federal agents. You cannot take him. We have a vacation planned. An agent firmly blocked her path, pushing her back. Mom, step back, the agent warned sternly. If you interfere with a federal arrest, you will be placed in custody for obstruction. Brittany shrank back, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Carol stood completely frozen near the front row, watching her golden child and her wealthy son-in-law face absolute annihilation. The harsh reality of the FBI raid completely shattered her delusions of grandeur. Her desperate eyes finally landed on Beatrice, who was standing quietly near the main entrance, leaning gracefully on her silver-handled cane. Carol practically sprinted across the ballroom floor, pushing past horrified guests. She threw herself at Beatrice's feet, dropping to her knees in a pathetic display of desperate submission. "Mother, please," she begged, tears streaming down her carefully preserved face. "You have to stop this. You have the power to make these charges go away. Anna is acting out of spite. She is destroying our family over a simple financial misunderstanding. I am your daughter. You have to protect me." The grand ballroom fell completely silent again. Hundreds of guests watched with bated breath, waiting to see how the legendary real estate mogul would respond to her own daughter's pathetic public groveling. I watched Beatrice closely, admiring the absolute unyielding strength she projected. She did not flinch. She looked down at Carol with eyes as hard and cold as glacier ice. Beatrice lifted her silver-handled cane and pointed it directly at Carol's chest, forcing her to back away. "You stole from a helpless newborn child." Beatrice stated, her voice carrying an intense, terrifying power that commanded the entire room. "You watched your own daughter suffer in poverty while you financed your shallow, pathetic existence with her stolen money. You are a greedy, manipulative thief." Carol sobbed harder, grasping weakly at the hem of Beatrice's dark velvet suit. "Please, Mother, I was just trying to keep the family relevant. I was doing it for us. Do not let them take everything away. I have nowhere else to go." Beatrice stepped back, pulling her suit away from Carol's grasping hands. She stood exceptionally tall, radiating the supreme authority of a woman who had conquered entire cities. She looked down at the sobbing, pathetic woman on the floor, delivering the final devastating blow. "You are no longer my daughter," Beatrice announced, her voice echoing clearly throughout the massive ballroom, sealing Carol's fate permanently. "I have officially removed you from my will. I have completely severed all your access to my estate. You will not receive another single cent from me for the rest of your miserable life. Now get out of my sight before I instruct the federal agents to arrest you right here on this floor." Carol collapsed completely, curling into a ball on the expensive hotel carpet, weeping hysterically. Her high society friends, the people she had spent years desperately trying to impress, were looking down at her with undisguised contempt. She had sacrificed her own daughter for social status, and now she had lost absolutely everything. I stood near the stage, watching the absolute wreckage of their fraudulent lives. The heavy, suffocating burden I had carried for 33 years completely vanished. I had systematically dismantled their empire using my own brilliant corporate strategy. They had tried to bury me, but they had completely forgotten that I was a seed. And tonight I had broken through the concrete to bloom into an untouchable force. I slowly lowered the microphone onto the table, smoothing my emerald silk gown. I took a deep breath of the cool air. The checkmate was flawlessly executed, and my victory was absolute. 6 months passed, with the rapid, undeniable clarity of a storm finally clearing. The justice system moved with an efficiency that completely shattered whatever lingering delusions my former family still harbored. Jamal did not get a sympathetic judge or a quiet, white-collar settlement. The federal prosecutors absolutely dismantled his entire fraudulent portfolio. He is currently serving a mandatory 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary, stripped of his financial licenses, his designer suits, and his arrogant pride. When my corporate liquidators legally seized the massive suburban mansion, Brittany was completely evicted within 24 hours. With Jamal in federal custody and possessing absolutely zero marketable skills of her own, my sister was violently forced into the brutal reality she had endlessly mocked me for. She currently works a grueling minimum wage retail job at a local discount mall, folding the exact cheap clothes she used to openly despise just to barely cover her basic living expenses. Carol faced an equally devastating and isolating reality. After Beatrice publicly disowned her and severed all financial ties, the high society circle completely blacklisted her overnight. Her wealthy friends blocked her phone number, and security guards actively turned her away from the exclusive country clubs she used to fiercely dominate. She now lives entirely alone in a cramped, poorly heated studio apartment far outside the city limits, spending her lonely days bitterly clutching expired gala invitations and mourning the elite social status she permanently destroyed. Derek fared no better. When Victor Harrison officially submitted our final legal invoice, the sheer magnitude of the exorbitant attorney fees pushed Derek into immediate, inescapable bankruptcy. His corporate firm fired him to strictly avoid the severe negative publicity of his malicious family court perjury. He lost his heavily subsidized luxury apartment and forfeited his expensive sports car, completely vanishing into the pathetic financial obscurity he was always terrified of. As for me, I am currently sitting behind a massive glass desk in my stunning San Francisco corner office. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a breathtaking panoramic view of the sparkling bay, illuminating the sleek, modern space. Nurture Core Holdings is actively expanding our international distribution networks, and the company valuation has climbed even higher. But my absolute greatest treasure is not the massive 9-digit balance reflecting in my secure corporate accounts. It is the quiet, peaceful sound coming from the high-end designer bassinet, resting safely right next to my desk. Leo is sleeping soundly wrapped in the softest premium organic cotton, completely protected from the toxic generational abuse that almost consumed him. I built an impenetrable fortress around my son and secured our absolute freedom. The grueling late nights, the intense financial sacrifices, and the overwhelming isolation were entirely worth this beautiful moment of pure serenity. I look down at my beautiful, thriving boy and feel a profound, unshakable sense of victory. Blood does not make a family, respect does. Have you ever realized that the greatest gift toxic people give you is proving exactly how powerful you are without them? Share your story in the comments below.